Thank you everyone for coming back. I understand that the chair is at a funeral, so unfortunately won't be joining us, and I'm not sure where the deputy chair is, but I have been elected the deputy chair. So let's kick off with questions from the opposition.
Well, Chair, just before you do that,
apologies.
has there been consideration of the question of whether all of these witnesses are required?
Yes, I think there has been, and we did inform Mr Cootes-Trotter that his attendance was not required, and I understand he has...
But no one else?
Okay. At this stage, no.
Right. I've asked.
Sorry. Opposition.
Thank you. I might actually ask Mr Smith to come up to the table. So I want to come back to this question about hotel quarantine. Commissioner, can you... I want to sort of get a bit more of an understanding of the operational role of the police in the hotel quarantine system and how the demarc between the public works element of it and the police functions, how that actually works at this point of delivery at the hotel.
So in terms of operationalising, I guess, police on the ground, Australian Defence Force on the ground and private security on the ground, we have that responsibility as the lead agency, and that is that person who is in charge. But if you looked at how the security guards and ADF, we don't tell ADF who to send us. They send us.
But you direct, so
we're responsible.
There'll be a police officer on site who will effectively have overarching control of the
100%.
site. And they will, do they determine the numbers of security guards that are required?
That is determined by the Police Operations Centre by assessment, depending on a whole range of factors. So the Police Operations Centre will determine for a particular hotel, how many security guards we'll need per floor, how many defence and police officers we will need on the perimeter and on transport and at the airport in terms of transportation to the hotels.
And so how does that get translated then into the procurement of the security staff? Police have any role in that?
I can't explain that, I guess, any better than what I did. Do you want me to re-answer the question earlier? Or?
On a site-by-site basis,
yeah.
You've done the assessment about I suppose, the human resource requirements.
Yeah.
That then gets communicated to Public Works Advisory, is that what it's called?
That's correct, yeah, that's correct.
And they then do the procuring. They then source the staff.
So they source the...
Tell them where they've got to be, at what time and for how long?
No, the Public Works Advisory procure the individual companies to provide security guards. New South Wales Police determines how many security guards we need on a day-by-day, 24-hour basis. And then the Police Operations Centre, through my understanding, it's DBC, but I can double-check.
Public Works Advisory, then I tell the firms how many guards are needed.
On a daily basis? Yeah, so then the Police Operations Centre, through the Public Works Advisory, tells them what sort of load that we will need from a manpower, person-power perspective daily.
Right, I see. So there's no direct line of communication between police and the contractors, is that right?
From an oversight perspective, there would be, like generally, but from a day-to-day hotel quarantine perspective, no.
Right, okay. So look, can I ask about, I understand that there was 169 private security officers that were removed from hotel security for various infractions. That was as of the 30th of October 2020. Do you have the numbers of private security officers that have now been removed in total?
I wouldn't have. I mean, I can get that for you on notice without.
Does that reporting come through to you, or does that go through Public Works Advisory? How does that information actually
we
get
collect
into the
that
system?
at the Police Operations Centre.
Right, I see. So if there are infractions, they get reported through police.
Absolutely.
Right, I see.
But I guess again, it is a complex in a sense because the role that Mr Smith plays is not linked to hotel quarantine. His role is about the oversight of the security industry.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Mr Smith, have you undertaken a review of the licences of any of those 169 security officers? Obviously, the figure is probably more than that now, that have been removed from the hotel quarantine program?
Yes, we've actually revoked 2 of the licences of guards involved in the program.
Can you give some details about those revocations?
Both individuals were revoked because they failed to comply with orders to self-isolate and by our consideration put the public at risk.
I see. And so they were both self-isolation revocations. I see. And so what about, there's been, I think, some media reports around systemic time fraud. So effectively, security guards either completing time and attendance records that actually exceed the amount of time that they're there, or actually reporting that people, in fact, who were supposed to be there were there, but actually, in fact, they weren't present at the time. Have you had any reports of that?
An investigation like that wouldn't fall under our responsibility. That would be a contractual issue involving PWA if they felt that they were being charged for guard hours not worked.
What about, but if there's non-attendance, surely that then comes into your area of responsibility, Commissioner?
It would come back into my area of responsibility in terms of us ensuring service delivery, no different if police didn't turn up from commands, if defence didn't turn up, which clearly they have, but absolutely yes.
So what's the process for investigating that?
Well, there wouldn't be an investigation. It would, well, if it was a fraudulent complaint, obviously, let's say it's not in that, because that will complicate our conversation, because that's a whole different bailiwick of investigation. But if there was an issue consistently where guards weren't turning up, then we would certainly put a complaint through to the Public Works Advisory, and if that was sort of systemic, then we would ask for that company not to be used.
And what about the individuals? Do they then, is that something that might result in a licence revocation?
If there was a sustained finding that guards had been involved in dishonest conduct, that would certainly go to the fitness and propriety to hold a licence.
So are you aware of any of these instances, Mr Smith? So none have been brought to your attention?
No sustained findings of that nature against any guard brought to our attention.
Right, I see. Can I clarify, Commissioner, just about the arrangements? It is the fact, is it not, that the contractors who have been engaged for hotel quarantine, but they are not permitted to subcontract the work, is that right?
That's correct.
Right, okay. So I've been provided with WhatsApp posts from a security firm called Number One Security, asking for guards for hotels in the CBD for 12-hour night and day shifts. So are they, Number One Security, are they one of the firms that have been contracted?
Mr Smith?
No, they're not.
Right, okay. So has there been any investigation about how this Number One Security seeking to procure security guards for hotel security, but they're not actually one of the contractors?
I have to take that one on notice. I'm not sure whether we have in our possession those WhatsApp messages you've got.
I see.
So if you are happy to divulge your informant, but if you provide that for us, we will investigate it.
All right, that's fine. I've also got a WhatsApp post for a 12-hour shift, offering the rate of $22.53 per hour for a day shift and $27.42 per hour for a night shift. And this is an advertisement for Adele Diamond Security. That's an hourly rate that's actually less than the modern award, given that it's in a casual engagement. Is that something that your that the LEC would? Sorry, is it the, no? It's the SLED that the SLED would investigate.
No, that's an area of responsibility for the Fair Work Ombudsman. All industrial relation matters and industrial obligations sit with them. We refer matters that we become aware of to them.
Commissioner, is it of a concern to you that there's this one that there's obviously subcontracting?
Could I ask the name of the company? Is that you did
so
say
that was Adele Diamond Security. Are they one of the contractors?
No, they're not one of the contractors.
No. So is it a concern to you that there's subcontracting going on?
Well, I mean, I guess if there was, it would be a concern. I guess I need to investigate if those WhatsApp messages are factual, and I will do that if you provide them to me.
Sure.
And whether they relate to quarantine hotels.
So they do relate to quarantine hotels. Well, that's my understanding, yes.
Does it say that in the message?
I'm not on the witness stand, I don't think.
Point of order.
No. I think we know what the answer will be. If we get back to questions and answers between
Thank you.
the witnesses
Deputy
and the
Chair.
members, that will be of assistance.
That's fair.
So is it also a concern, just as the overarching person, the person who has overarching responsibility for the hotel quarantine system that this might be occurring, and that guards that are, you know, at the front line of our quarantine system are being underpaid.
Again, if that's, I think Mr. Smith captured that well. From a moral perspective, do I think that's wrong? Absolutely, I do. From a legislative perspective, is that my responsibility? No, it's not. But what I want is to continue to run a professional hotel quarantine. We brought back 144,000 Australians, which I think is an amazing feat for all of us as New South people. So I would just say that it is in my interest for it to run smoothly. And if there are complaints or issues, I would ask anyone to forward those, because it's in all our interests that hotel quarantine is a success.
Mr. Smith, have you investigated all site protection services? Has there been an investigation involving all site protection services?
I'll take that question on notice, if I may.
Okay, that's fine. Mr. Smith, who is Shane Brady?
Shane Brady is substantively an employee of the Department of Premier and Cabinet, who I understand has been seconded to the Public Works Advisory, or was for a period of the hotel quarantine program. Whether or not he's still there, I'm not sure.
Does he sit on the SLED Advisory Committee?
Not at the moment, no.
Has he?
Yes.
Did he sit at any time while the hotel quarantine program was running?
Yes, he sat on the Advisory Council during 2019 and 2020.
Did he resign from the SLED Advisory Committee, or was he removed?
No, members serve a 2-year term, so his term, along with his cohort at the time, naturally ended at the end of last year.
So was he involved in the SLED at the time when he was managing the contracts for hotel and quarantine?
I'm not sure that I would agree that he was managing the contracts for hotel quarantine. He certainly played a role. Whether it was a managerial role, I don't know, because that was the responsibility of another agency.
So you're not aware of the nature of his role with Public Works Advisory?
I understand he was engaged from a subject matter expertise point of view, but I don't believe he held a managerial role in relation to procurement.
Commissioner, are you aware of an allegation against Mr. Brady that where he was involved in detaining a security contractor in the hotel quarantine program?
No, the last commentary you had with Mr. Smith, I'm not aware of the person's name. I'm not aware of anything you spoke about, or that allegation that you put to me.
There's no, you're not aware of that allegation? That
Negative. I've never heard the man's name, actually.
Right. And so you're not aware of any previous allegations for assault assault by Mr. Brady?
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
Well, that cut that page out.
Do you have something?
Yeah. Thanks. I'll ask Commissioner Fuller. I want to ask about the Broderick report. Obviously, you'd be familiar with the report. One of the recommendations was the Commissioner, Deputy Commissioners and Assistant Commissioners should develop and deliver a clear and strong written commitment statement signed by all that articulates the business case for change, reinforces their zero tolerance to sex discrimination and sexual harassment, and signals their commitment to the full implementation of the review's recommendations. Has that occurred?
Yes. Can I just add, sorry, quickly, that the Broderick report came about because of me. I asked for it. I didn't go and ask government if I should do it. I didn't ask them. I went and sourced her out to come into our organisation to do a review. Post Ronald's report. And
an excellent review it was, and obviously just interested to see the follow-up that has occurred since the report was handed down. So is the turnover of female sworn officers in the New South Wales Police Force sort of higher or lower than their male counterparts? And I mean, it's obviously going to be proportionally, because the overall numbers are much lower. So proportionally, is the turnover higher or lower?
We're just talking about sworn officers, ma'am?
Yes.
Yeah, so at the moment, women make up about 35.4% of the workforce, which is a great result. we continue to recruit large numbers of women of all ages to join the organisation, and I see this as an organisation of choice, and much of that is around change management. If you look at North America, their average percentage of female workforce is 8%. So I know it should be 50%, and that should always be an aspirational goal. But we do not have problems in recruiting women continually to come into the organisation. Now, the exact separation figures I'll take on notice because I don't know, but I do know there's not a systemic issue with women particularly leaving the organisation.
So it's your contention that you don't have a problem recruiting women and you don't have a problem retaining women in New South Wales Police?
No, but I mean, it could. I need to look at the percentages, but it's not a damning percentage where 90% of the people leaving the organisation are women. But I can quite easily get you that on notice as well.
That would be useful. I want to ask you about Operation Coolum. Operation Coolum involved the visit of a senior police officer to the house of a junior police officer and a subsequent complaint by the junior officer regarding inappropriate behaviour, including hugging and kissing a number of times. The LEC recommended action be taken and the senior officer be dismissed, but instead the senior officer was allowed to leave police before the outcome of the LEC. So why was this officer allowed to just walk away?
So from my perspective, from an employment law perspective, it is much easier to get people out of the organisation than to risk matters going before the Industrial Relations Commission and losing them and having them reinstated. Now, LEC doesn't have an impact on the decisions that the Industrial Relations Commission, the outcome, and I lose matters every year. In fact, I've sacked around 94 officers in the last 4 years, and a percentage of those are returned by the Industrial Relations Commission. Now, I'm not saying they're wrong, but what I'm saying is that if LEC's report is damning, would we rather just have this person out of the organisation, or do I make them stay to try and punish them and then lose the punishment of the Industrial Relations Commission, which is a chance? Now, people may accept that answer or not, but that is the philosophy I take to it.
I mean, Operation
Pretty sensible.
Tabaka, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, was another LEC investigation about a commander. There was significant evidence of derogatory terms, bullying and harassment, including making statements about not wanting to take the GDs away because the girls are sluts, and on another occasion stated that a female police officer was a tart and had a nice pair of tits. Why was this police officer allowed to take sick leave when he came under investigation and then allowed to leave rather than being dismissed as recommended by the LEC? Is it the same answer?
From an employment law perspective, everything you said is just lawfully impossible, but I understand your frustrations, but you can't not allow someone to take sick leave.
Indeed. I mean, the frustration, I think, is that, and this isn't necessarily my frustration, I think it is a frustration of female officers, that they have been subject to this kind of behaviour and that there is no accountability for the perpetrators.
So I made changes 2 years ago, ma'am, that if there was a allegation of any sort of sexual assault, sexual harassment, it was an automatic notification to me. So I bypass all the red tape and I deal with it personally. So from my perspective, I accept there will be frustrations in all areas of the organisation, but it is the one thing that I say, it comes directly to me so I can make the decision on what sanctions. And if these officers make a decision that they're going to resign and I can get them out of the organisation rather than take a lengthy 6 to 12 months, is what it takes to remove someone because of procedural fairness, I just think it's a better outcome. I can't unfortunately stop someone from taking sick leave who deserve to answer questions.
Is that actually correct?
What's that?
Commissioner, don't you have the power to suspend someone without pay? If they're, particularly if they're accused of sexual assault.
There's Premier's Guide, but that's not what they were accused of. Like, sexual assault is a criminal offence. Now, if someone is charged criminally, yes, I can suspend them. The minute they're convicted from a Premier's guidelines, I can suspend them without pay. If there is enormous amount of evidence, then yes, I can, on charging, suspend them without pay as well. There would be a mix of around 35, 40 officers at the moment at different levels of suspension with and without pay. say yes. But the example that was given to me, I don't think you said sexual assault.
No, in relation to Operation Tabaka, it was derogatory language.
And for derogatory, I'm never going to be able to suspend someone without pay for derogatory language.
I mean, I think I appreciate what you're saying, but I mean, one of the entire bases of the New South Wales Police Force is that people who do the wrong thing are accountable for their actions. Like, that's why we have police.
I've sacked 94 people in 4 years for bad behaviour, taken reviewable action against many, many more. I've signed a personal doctrine. I brought independents to come in and review. We're driving cultural change. We are an employer of choice. But you know what? I've still got a lot more work to do, absolutely. But I can't beat employment law. I can't beat the IRC.
And you finished on that, Rose?
Yes, yeah.
Commissioner, did you have a chance to provide some of those answers?
No, and Mr. Shoebridge, in fairness, I don't think I was asked and took on notice 36 questions, but nevertheless, I'm endeavouring to answer all of them, and I will have them back well and truly in time for you to read them and possibly question me. But in fairness, I don't think you asked me 36 questions and I took them on notice.
I think it was a collection of the questions from Ms Jackson and myself.
I
But,
still suspect
there's a lesson.
I will
there is a
acknowledge
lesson
I was
there.
responsible for some of them.
There is a lesson there. Careful what you ask for, Commissioner.
In fairness, I don't think he asked for it.
I tell you that it's you won't get it at 10 to 5. I promise you that.
Yeah. And I think that there are a number of questions that require a degree of detail and further investigation.
And you may not get that detail
I understand
between
that,
now and the
Commissioner.
time I walk it in. If I would ask it when they come in, I could just quickly read it before I hand it up. Is that okay?
What we might do
I
is
think-
when they come in, it might be a useful time for us all to have a short recess.
Will that extend the day?
Not beyond 8:30, I think, Commissioner. So
Otherwise, we punish everybody. But nevertheless, they are being worked on diligently, and I'll get them to you ASAP.
I appreciate that, Commissioner. Commissioner, just today,
Oh, sorry, and it may be possible, subject to it, that Commissioner Fuller could be excused from the table to allow him to examine it whilst other questions are asked of other witnesses. That might be a way of keeping things moving.
indeed.
Yeah.
But why don't we just assess it when they come in, and we'll find the most convenient way to address it?
I would only need 10 minutes. I wouldn't be gone for an hour, I promise you.
My guess is that Rose and I would probably want to also read it, so a short recess would be useful. But you know, that being said, the chair may be here.
Yeah.
Yes, I suspect that the Commissioner would want to read it before you do, but
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll deal with it
Move
when
on,
they
Dave.
come. Commissioner, today, an ex-boyfriend of the woman who tragically took her life after making the complaints of sexual assault by the Attorney General has come out and provided a public statement. To assist, Commissioner, I might just hand you a copy of the news.com report of that.
Thank you.
Very carefully worded, David. Yeah. That in a negative sense, but he's been very careful.
Commissioner, I'm more than happy if you want to
No, that's fine. I don't want
read
to
all
waste
of it, but
everybody's time.
where I'd like to take you to is page 3 of that printout. Oh, sorry, it might be useful if I take you to the bottom of page 2.
Yes?
The statement is from a man called James Hook, and you'll see at the bottom of page 2, in the statement provided to news.com, he notes that he is the man referred to as James in the woman's unsworn statement and the extracts from her diaries. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
If I could take you to page 3 that has extracts from the statement from it,
Yep.
what I might do, Commissioner, is I'll ask you to read all of that on page 3 and then I'll put some of it on the record, but I'll let you read that first.
To be honest, sir, it's not mine. I don't think I should have to read it on.
No, I'm not asking you to read it on the record.
Oh, okay.
Well, the only way that now can be done, actually, unsatisfactorily, is with some form of inquiry, which I don't think we can make a resolution anyway.
I know. Man, he's going to die. Someone can't disease and something.
Thank you, sir. Red.
In part, Mr. Hook says this, mine is just one set of recollections and I am aware of the fallibility of human memory, however unintentional. That said, I have what I consider to be clear recollections of relevant discussions I had with her over the years from mid-1988 until her death. I also have what I consider to be clear recollections of relevant discussions I had with Christian Porter from April 1992 in Perth and through the mid-1990s. Do you see that,
Yes,
Commissioner?
I can.
Given this fresh evidence has come in, will you be asking police to reconsider opening the investigation and in particular to approach Mr Hook to see what, if any, evidence he can give to assist?
So, Chair, you're Chair now, Chair?
Yes.
So could I assume that this person is the first time he's come forward, New South Wales Police is not aware of him? Is that?
No.
No, I
What I
think-
might do then, Commissioner, is I might take you to page 4. And you'll see halfway down page 4, there's a quote that begins, and I'll put it on the record. The New South Wales Police have determined that a criminal prosecution is not possible in this case. I made myself known to the New South Wales Police after her death, and I understand why they were unable to interview me. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can you advise? Well, so that may answer your query
It
about
does,
whether
thank
he's
you.
made himself known to police. Given that, I'll ask again. Will you seek that the officers who were previously investigating this make contact with Mr Hook to determine whether or not the investigation should be reopened?
From my perspective, if New South Wales Police, the officers who were investigating this matter, have already spoken to him and he fully disclosed all of the information that is in this report, I don't think it changes it. Now, if he for some reason withheld enormous amount of information, inculpatory evidence that we can use, then that's a different case. But I would have to talk to the investigators to see, did he not disclose something that's in the media today? That's the question, Mr Shoebridge.
Well, on the face of it, he's not saying that he disclosed that material to the police. On the face of the record, he's saying that he's made himself known to the New South Wales Police. They seem quite distinct things, would you agree?
I would have to take it on notice, in fairness, to try and get to the bottom of what he has said today in its entirety and then work out whether we were aware of that or not.
I have what has been sent to me, which is, I understand, a full copy of the statement that he sent to news.com. I might just provide a copy of that to you.
Thank you.
And I'm more than happy, Commissioner, if you want to take the time to read that. It's only one page. And just for the record, I'll table those two documents.
The statement attached to the story.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Commissioner, on the assumption that that relevant material had not been provided to police and the statement not provided to police, if that is the case, will you be seeking that the police who were investigating this matter reopen the investigation and make contact with Mr Hook and take a statement with Mr Hook to determine if that changes their position on a potential prosecution?
I'm more than happy to look into it. I know it's a matter of Australian significance. I'm not going to say here on the record that we're reopening the case, but I'm more than happy to talk to Deputy Commissioner Hudson and then through chain of command to ensure that all information has been properly assessed in terms of arriving that there's not enough admissible evidence to go forward. But I won't be saying today that we're reopening the investigation. I am saying I'll take on notice all the information you give me to ensure that that is properly assessed.
And Commissioner, there are two elements of this statement that seem to have significant power. One is the proposition from Mr Hook that the woman had made much more contemporaneous complaints and disclosures about it.
David, with respect, I've read the statement. One might draw some assumptions from it, but That's not what the statement says, and I'm concerned
All
if this is
No.
overcooked at this stage.
Well, perhaps I'll phrase it differently, and I appreciate that. There are two elements of it that seem to me that on the face of it would appear to have potential significant relevance to any criminal prosecution. One would be, what if any the content, what the content was of those disclosures and far more contemporaneous conversations that were had between Mr. Hook and the woman, dating from mid-1988 to her death. That's clearly relevant, isn't it?
Evidence of first complaint in sexual assault, both historic adult and even for children, is extremely important. And that is absolutely a case. And that would, if you had a victim with an admissible statement, be of great assistance in a prosecution.
And one of the other areas that would be of relevance would be, what, if any, statements the Attorney General had made in relation to the incidents between April 1992 and the mid-1990s. They would both be relevant,
And I'm happy to
potentially
take,
highly relevant
to take
matters to
those
consider.
two issues on notice and through chain of command ask those questions for reasonable answers back through budget estimates. But I won't be saying today, Mr Shoebridge, that we were opening any investigations.
Oh, Commissioner, I'll be satisfied at this point if you'll take them on board, address them through the chain of command, and then make the call whether or not that would lead to the reopening of investigation, which is, I understand, your position. Is that right?
That's right. But and again, with any matter, we're always open to new investigations. It's not unusual for us to make calls from the community through the media, and we use politicians to try and leverage information to assist to get to the bottom of the truth. Now, the challenge in this one, again, Mr Shoebridge, was that the victim withdrew her complaint, and our current policy stood that we don't proceed against victims' wishes. Now, I know she has taken her life or has lost her life since then.
Well, and I think the proposition I put to you earlier, Commissioner, was she took her life very close in time to when she made the decision.
Yep.
And therefore, her frame of mind and her ability to make a clear decision on that would be, I would have thought, something I would expect to be part of the decision about prosecuting or not. Is that the case? Is that part of the decision-making matrix?
I mean, the reality is, I think we discussed this at length this morning, but we don't proceed against the victim's wishes for historic and current sexual assault matters.
Of course, for very good reasons, in relation to domestic violence matters, there are incidents where police do proceed.
Now,
with
I think I'm on the
cases.
record this morning saying we are pro-arrest for domestic and family violence issues.
And can you explain what the rationale for a different policy on sexual assault matters to domestic violence matters is?
Sexual assault is a very difficult offence to proceed on, and it's been very difficult offence to prove, and historic sexual assaults statistically are even harder. Now, that is just the way the justice system processes this crime. With domestic and family violence, there is often evidence from a neighbour, from a child, there's a split lip, there's a bruise, the ability to proceed on them, and they are often still serious matters, obviously, but in terms of the complexity of investigating a common assault is much different to a historic sexual assault. So I think it's extremely hard to draw a bow to say that we should be pro-arrest on a sexual assault matter without the justice system significantly reforming.
But those are matters pertinent to the criminal justice system as opposed to the wishes or the views of the complainant.
But if a complainant has a black eye from an assault during a domestic situation, it is very different to someone in the court later saying that they had consensual sex with someone when they gave us a statement saying that they were raped. Like, it's a very different situation, complex situation.
Have you had any consideration about reviewing that policy?
I think I was on the record this morning saying we're reviewing every aspect of the way we do our business in terms of adult sexual assault, both current and historic matters.
Yeah, and so what I was going to ask is, reviewing that policy after consultation with particularly women's legal groups.
Yep.
In order, some might suggest that the police making the decision to prosecute and not leaving the onus and the burden on the woman who's complaining may actually have systemic benefits.
I agree, but I just would say that if it's only the police going on the journey with women's NGOs, it's not enough. We're all got to go on the journey. Otherwise, we're not going to get change.
Yeah,
But
in
we
terms
are-
of the prosecution
We are open for
approach,
change, Mr. Shoebridge, at the end of the day. But if others don't come on the journey, then I fear we won't be in a better place.
Yes.
Can I just ask two questions about that matter?
Feel-
Were you aware of anyone else who made themselves known to police? So this man has said that he made himself known to police subsequent to the complainant's death. Are you aware of anyone else who proactively made themselves known to police?
I would have to take that on notice. But
And secondly, he refers to understanding why the police were unable to interview him. Can you shed any light on what that might be a reference to? I mean, obviously,
I would
at this
assume it's
point,
covert, I assume.
but I think at this point the investigation was closed, I understand, because it was after the complainant's death. So perhaps is that what it's a reference to? Why were police unable to interview
I can
him?
answer. I just can't answer the question for you now.
Yes, if you could take that on notice, that might be useful.
Thank you.
And whilst we're in the taking on notice mode, Commissioner, can you take on notice? Well, it's a little unclear from that statement why Mr. Hook's statement why a statement wasn't taken from police at the time.
Yeah,
Do you
think
have any
if you-
shed any light on that?
I mean, it's my opinion as an experienced police officer, Mr. Shoebridge. I'm on the record in saying it. I think some of Australia's greatest legal practitioners who are defence lawyers have all agreed if you don't have a victim with a signed statement, proceeding on this matter is just an impossibility. It's not just Mick Fuller, the police officer. It's not just Mick Fuller, the police commissioner. I mean, this is a shared view by some of Australia's greatest barristers and senior counsels.
Commissioner, I'm not here trying to second-guess determinations about what's required for a brief of evidence to go to the DPP to satisfy the onus before a prosecution can be commenced. My sole interest is to determine if all avenues have been undertaken by New South Wales Police, and that would include obviously speaking to and getting a detailed statement from Mr. Hook, wouldn't it?
But if we don't have a statement from the victim, we don't have a case.
Well, but what you do have since that decision was taken, correct me if I'm wrong, is a draft affidavit and a series of diary entries, together now with it appears a willing cooperative witness in the form of Mr. Hook. Two material changes since the decision was made not to prosecute. Do you agree?
We have further information that's inadmissible evidence in its current form.
And have you had advice on whether or not the diary entries would be inadmissible?
The diary's entries would be admissible if we had a signed statement with a jurat. They would be admissible.
Have you had legal advice on the admissibility or otherwise of the diary entries?
Well, a judge can make any determination in terms of what's admissible or not in a particular trial. That is a case. But the reality is, on the evidence of law, is that admissibility of evidence comes with a signed statement with a proper jurat.
Well, Commissioner, I think there may well be circumstances, and this is what I'd be asking if you've got legal advice on, where diary entries that can be proven to be diary entries of an individual may be admissible in certain circumstances. And I'm asking if you've got legal advice on that. It would appear that you haven't, so I'm going to ask you, will you get legal advice on it?
We have internal legal advice from experienced police prosecutors. Have I gone to the DPP for advice? No, I haven't.
But my understanding was the decision to not prosecute was made before the police received the unsworn affidavit and the attached diary entries, and before the...
So I think...
have you received legal advice on
I
that?
think we need, in my opinion, if we wait till we get the questions answered today, it'll shed more light. But it's my understanding that primary document that has been spoken about, we didn't get that until after she had lost her life.
Yeah. And so I don't understand how it is that you've received legal advice on the admissibility or otherwise of those documents if you'd already made the decision not to prosecute before you received them. That's the confusion I have, Commissioner, and maybe you could shed light on it.
But something can only be admissible if you have a case, like a criminal case. We don't have a criminal case without the victim. I feel like and I know it's a complex legal argument, but we're putting the cart before the horse. There is no case. There is no victim.
Well, Commissioner, just because a victim has passed away does not mean you can't have a case and there is no victim. But what I'm asking you is, you indicated earlier that you'd received advice, internal advice, that the diary entries would not be admissible. And I'm asking, how is that the case if you had determined before you received the diary entries not to proceed with the prosecution?
I don't think that lines up right chronologically, Mr. Shoebridge, but I'll take that on notice in terms of the chronology. But I am all but sure that chronologically that all the information was assessed and it was assessed that without the victim, without the signed statements, there's no admissible evidence for us to interview any person criminally.
All right. Well, I'll pass it back to the opposition and maybe in due course we'll get that additional material. Mr. Diadam, Ms. Jackson.
Mr. Smith, you've So I refer back to my earlier line of questioning. I mentioned an incidence of this time and attendance, allegation of time and attendance fraud. I'm advised that that issue related to ISEC Proprietary Limited. Are they a security contractor for the purposes of hotel security, Commissioner?
Yes.
They are, yeah. So those allegations, were they referred to SLED?
I'll take that on question notice, if I may.
All right, and if you could also provide some details about the outcome of that investigation if they were referred. Mr. Smith, I wanted to ask you about a United Security Group. Actually, I might ask the Commissioner. That United Security Group, they provide hotel quarantine security.
My understanding that is correct. They're certainly part of the contract group, is my understanding.
So, Mr. Smith, are you...
I think it's unified, I think, Sue, is that?
Sorry.
Just to be clear, I think it's unified.
Sorry, Unified Security Group.
Yes.
And the principal of that organisation, one of the principals is David Millward, is that correct?
I wouldn't know.
You don't know? Okay.
Sorry, I can take that on notice or...
That particular question as to whether he's a principal of that organisation is a matter under investigation.
It's under investigation. Okay, so I was going to ask you, Mr. Smith, about whether you were aware of the minutes of a meeting of creditors of an organisation with a similar name, the USS Risk Proprietary Limited, that was formerly the Unified Security Group Australia. And that in those minutes, there's a note that that body, which I understand has similar principles to the United Security Group Australia Proprietary Limited, went into liquidation owing $4.5 million to the Office of State Revenue. Are you aware of that particular issue?
I'll take the specifics of that on notice, if I may. I'm certainly aware of related matters, but...
So there's, underlying this is, I suppose, a suggestion that this Unified Security Group might actually be a Phoenix organisation, and that the principals are engaged, are alleged to have engaged in phoenixing activity. Commissioner, do you think it's appropriate that hotel security, hotel quarantine security is contracted to an organisation that might be a phoenixing organisation, particularly one that owes a substantial amount of money to the New South Wales government?
I think it's my understanding that currently under investigation, which I think sounds entirely appropriate.
So, Mr Smith, you'll be able to provide on notice some details about the extent of that investigation, where it's up to, and if it's concluded, what the outcome has been?
I can provide you some information now that the company has been subject to a second notice of show cause by SLED, and their response to that is due this close of business today, and so the matters remain under investigation.
So if SLED makes the decision to revoke its security licence, then obviously that has immediate effect in terms of its position as a contractor.
Oh, that'd be straight off the contract.
Straight off.
100%.
Yeah. All right. I think that's all the questions we've got for you, Mr Smith. So I think, unless any of the other...
Do you have
David,
questions for Mr
questions?
Smith? We might let him go.
So unless the government wants to investigate any line of questioning with Mr Smith at the end.
Let me give that a moment's thought. No, is the answer.
Well,
Mr Smith, Mr Smith, you can go with grace.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner, can I ask you about Section 93Z of the New South Wales Crimes Act? You're aware of this section?
Yes, Sam.
Yeah. So I understand that in estimates on Tuesday, the Attorney-General disclosed that there'd been 2 prosecutions under this section, and both were are now in the process of being annulled by New South Wales Police. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what's the reason why they need to be annulled?
There was additional red tape put in for some reason that I'm not sure of. Nevertheless, we were supposed to tick a box by going to the DPP. The officers in this case didn't do that. We prosecuted 2 individuals. I don't know both the cases well enough to recant them, but it was picked up in an audit, and that resulted in the charges. These people pleaded guilty, I might add. Nevertheless, the charges will be withdrawn. They will be recharged, and they will still, I think, which is absolutely appropriate, face the appropriate charges.
It's a pretty big stuff.
An amendment that was moved in the upper house that added the additional hurdle.
Yeah, which was unhelpful. And when you think about police...
We do that sort of thing.
At midnight, an officer...
Respect, Commissioner, it's not
Sorry,
appropriate
sir.
for you to make adverse comments about what the legislature decided to do or
In
not
fact, I
to
think it's a
do.
breach of the standing orders to pass shade on the rulings of the
Many of us who
chamber.
have.
Can I just say, sir, when...
Can I just clarify, it's 2 cases, 2 separate cases, not two
separate cases,
in
that's
one
right.
incident.
We put a number of safeguards in place to ensure it can't happen again.
Right, okay. And so how much does it actually cost? Like, how much would that have cost to have undertaken that prosecution and now have to do it all over again?
The fact they both pleaded guilty, it would be a very small amount of money, to be honest with you. If they were big trials, it could have cost a lot of money, but they weren't.
And so when is that likely to occur? When is the process likely to be reinitiated?
I think, as we speak, it is all happening.
Right.
The wheels of justice reversing.
Commissioner, you recently made a submission to a federal... Oh, sorry, this is to a different commissioner. This is to Commissioner Barnes. So, Commissioner, you recently made a submission to a federal parliamentary inquiry stating that since the COVID-19 outbreak, there is a noticeable increase in online activity amongst the extreme right-wing community, particularly around COVID-19 rhetoric. This is a concern that the pandemic is being used to support the broader extreme right-wing views, such as the Boogaloo ideology. There have been numerous concerns amongst communities regarding increased abuse and physical assaults, particularly in the Asian community. Has your intelligence identified a greater risk as a result of this phenomena that you've identified in your submission?
As you'd appreciate, the ideologies, the attitudes are one thing, capability is the other thing that makes evil attitudes dangerous. We haven't necessarily across the board seen any increase in capability. There's been an increase amount of communication with among those groups that was concerning, and for that reason it's been monitored.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Fuller, I understand that 18% of Chinese Australians in a recent Lowy Institute report said that they'd been physically threatened or attacked because of their Chinese heritage. What work has been undertaken, particularly regarding the identification by the New South sorry, I've directed to the wrong commissioner, back to you, Commissioner Barnes, by the Crime Commission of the increased online activity by extreme right-wing groups to better protect the Chinese community. Have you done any research on how that might be achieved?
No, I'm not aware of any monitoring of online communications that indicated that Chinese people were at greater risk now than at any other time.
Have you undertaken any work with other communities, particularly the Islamic or the Jewish communities, in relation to this issue around right-wing extremism?
I'd have to take that on notice. I'm not, off the top of my head, I'm not aware of any projects focusing on protecting those communities, but I can look into that for you.
Okay, wonderful.
Thanks, Commissioner Fuller. I might just go back to some of those, the line of questioning that I was discussing previously with you. So, I mean, one of the other findings that Elizabeth Broderick made when you asked her to come and look at New South Wales Police was that 1 in 3 female officers had been subject to sexual harassment by their colleagues. That obviously that's quite an alarming statistic. Have you taken any particular action in relation to that?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's you know, that cultural change is now embedded into our leadership programs. It's about the language we use as leaders. It's about the importance of people understanding that bad behaviour in a sexual nature is a direct report to me. It's about talking. We have conferences with women leaders. It's about setting standards. It's about recruitment numbers. It's about how many women are in leadership positions. It's a whole package of things that we're consistently working on to have a safe workplace.
I mean, on women in leadership positions, we still have a situation where less than 1 in 4 sergeants are women, less than 1 in 5 inspectors, and only about 1 in 10 superintendents. So we still have a very lopsided...
And every time I addressed a women's group, they would say that the old promotion system was the greatest inhibitor to promoting women in the workforce. So that's one of the reasons why we have a new promotion system that gives great equity to the best person getting the job, not the person that has the most amount of time to study. So the new promotion system will have a significant impact on gender and equity in terms of promotion.
And when was the new promotion system was brought in recently?
Late last year, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, is one of the tenets of the new promotional system an attempt to better balance work and family commitments for women, and in particular understand that they might need flexible work arrangements at certain times in their career? Is that embedded in the new promotion system?
In a sense it is. The new promotion system is about just clearly explaining that you can do the job. The old promotion system was an examination where you had to invest an enormous amount of hours to answer all of these questions that women just don't have. And we know all the reasons why they don't have that, because they're working, they're juggling families, they're juggling carers' responsibilities, and it was the greatest single inhibitor. Now they get to walk in and explain why they're the right person for the job, just like anyone else does in any other employment. And I think it will have a significant impact on our percentages going forward.
I mean,
This was a bit of ledge that passed through our house, wasn't it? Supported by both sides.
It was.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can answer your question.
there is the issue of underrepresentation of women in senior leadership positions, and I appreciate you say that you're hoping that the new promotional system will address that. There's still an issue in relation to the distribution of female officers in different areas of the force. So, for example, highway patrol and tactical operations
So
have
Highway
significantly
Patrol,
fewer
I think we've just
women.
promoted 4 new female inspectors, which is outstanding work by the commander, who's a female, Assistant Commissioner Karen Webb, who has a lot more females now in the Highway Patrol. But the challenge then is attracting females into that type of work. Look, the areas like tactical operations, I mean, I wouldn't want to work there, to be honest with you. Like, and not every area in the organisation is attractive to people for certain reasons. If you look at the mounted unit, we have had problems attracting men there, and we've had a big drive to get some more men in the mounted unit. So we never give up, but there are some type of roles that are not attractive to me because I don't want to go camping, I don't want to get in the mud, I don't want to dig, there's things that you just don't want to do. But I think areas like the Highway Patrol is a really good example where we're driving change by picking women to do leadership roles.
And to the extent that it's personal preference, of course, but I think you can accept, Commissioner, that historically sexist attitudes about what roles women are well suited can also play a role. And so, for example, you see women very overrepresented in administrative roles, and in some of the more prestigious, perhaps physically demanding roles, you see fewer women. And so is there some acknowledgement of that in the way that you try and distribute officers around the force as well?
We look at commands from a leadership perspective. As long as you don't need a specific skill for that role, then they're open for everyone. And again, I feel like the new promotion system will level that out. But there are some roles that classically women haven't applied for because I just don't think they like that work, and I don't like it either.
Going back to some of those questions around, where there have been examples of misconduct, and you acknowledge that, and officers have left the force.
And I have sacked officers as well for consistent behaviour around sexual harassment. Yes.
Can you understand how, with only 15% of people who've experienced sexual harassment making a formal complaint, when they see the outcome of complaints is essentially the perpetrator being able to walk away, they can perhaps conclude, what's the point of making a complaint?
I think it's fair they feel that way. But I think as well, I can't control employment law. I can't control everything. All I can do is make sure that I get these people out of the organisation as quick as I can, and that the victims feel supported. And I know in some cases they don't. They feel broken, and I accept that. But I can't take it more serious than saying I'm the arbiter of all these matters, no matter how minor they are in terms of it. I personally take on board everyone.
Does it concern you then when just, I think, last week there were reports, obviously the women in the New South Wales Police Force say an vulgar boys' club culture enables discrimination and harassment. One woman said she only heard the result of 1 of her 10 complaints. Does that concern you, that
I think there was some unfair reporting in the newspaper by a particular journalist, and we offered him to come. We would make as many policewomen available to him to talk to them, and they could talk honestly about their journey, good or bad, and that was refused. I think we also need to come to terms. There's lots of senior females who are driving positive behaviour, and I think by being negative entirety does mean that the 35% of women that are working hard, doing the right thing, driving cultural change with the leadership team, I think we need to recognise there's a lot going well in our organisation. And I think there's some organisations out there could come and look at us, at least to have a look at the changes we're making, to be honest with you.
Yeah, perhaps the Parliament is one of them. But, nonetheless, Commissioner, is New South Wales Police a boys' club?
No, it's not. It's not a boys' club. Now, has it been a boys' club in the past? Yes, it has. But now we have areas like the mounted unit that there are girls' clubs, and I need to get more men in there. And you try to get equity everywhere you can. I think 35%, and if you put admin staff in, then the workforce almost balances to 50-50. So it's a bit hard just to call it a boys' club when you're balancing with sworn and unsworn nearly 50%.
Okay, so I might just come back to Commissioner Barnes. So you'd obviously be aware of the incident that occurred in the Grampians just recently with an extreme right-wing group. And of course, there was also that recent attack by a member of the Proud Boys and a security guard at a media outlet.
Well, I'm not aware of the second incident.
A media outlet attack?
Oh, yes, yeah, I am in
Victoria
Melbourne,
as well, yeah.
Yeah, so how much of a risk are these groups to New South Wales?
Well, it's not something you can calibrate and put a number on it. They are obviously increasing in risk, and they're under increasing attention for that reason.
Well, how do you calibrate the risk? Like, how do you assess the varying competing risks? Presumably you have to make some decision in terms of where you
People are all entitled to express repugnant views, if they move to the stage where there's a basis to suspect they may either themselves engage in violence or encourage others to engage in violence, then they risk being charged with criminal offences.
So do you think, I understand that Australia, of the Five Eyes countries, Australia is the only one that hasn't listed any right-wing extremist organisations as terrorists. Do you think that designating right-wing extremist organisations such as the Proud Boys, as Canada has done, is an appropriate course of action?
There's one under consideration right now. It was announced last week by...
Questions to...
Well, you make a
Mr.
statement that
Mr.
was
Barnes.
corrected in a previous budget estimate. So.
It's under consideration right now
Right,
at the Commonwealth level.
All right, thank you. I might now... actually, Mr Barnes, I think that's... Unless, David, do you have questions for Mr Barnes?
I do.
Oh, okay, well,
Sorry,
there you
Mr
go.
Barnes, you have
No
to stay
worries.
there.
Sadly,
I'll try and knock them off in the next round, Mr
I was
Barnes.
thinking I could give you an early mark, but unfortunately it's not to be. Commissioner, after a drop in numbers during 2017 in homicide shoot with intent to murder figures, the number of shootings have started to creep up again. And in October 2019 to September 2020, the figures with 12 in the Greater Sydney area and a jump from 5 in the previous year. Has this trend continued? And is it related to the current outbreak of gang violence in the Cumberland and Bankstown local government areas?
Some are domestic related, but a majority are related back to organised crime, and there is a link to turf war, and then there is a link to those who owe money for drugs not received.
So in terms of the sort of recent shootings across Auburn and Cumberland,
You can finish this.
have any of the firearms that were used, do we know what the source of those weapons have been? Are they weapons that that have been previously reported as stolen, or are they weapons that you don't actually know
The great
origin
challenge with that question, sir, is that if there is a drive-by shooting and we don't seize the weapon and make an arrest, we don't know the answer to that. We do attempt at every crime scene to process it, find the shell, and if there is a casing, to test that forensically in terms of linking it. Gun control in Australia is still extremely strong. Importing firearms is one of the primary ways of getting illegal firearms, and secondarily is that of breaking into homes and stealing them.
It's just in terms of that. From the data that where you do recover casings and you have some indication, what is that telling you in terms of whether there's an increase in imported arms or...
Could I take it on notice just to give you a more succinct answer?
That's fine.
You finished, Anthony? My question is to the Crime Commissioner, Mr Barnes. And in terms of the where the concern is in terms of far-right extremism, you said that there's, I think in submissions that you've made to a federal inquiry, the Crime Commission, you've got a concern about a rising concern in relation to far-right extremism in New South Wales. Is that right, Mr Barnes?
As you know, that federal inquiry is looking at the impact of COVID on law enforcement,
Yeah.
and so our submission addressed whether or not there had been any increased threat, amongst other things, on those groups. Yes.
Yeah, and it would be fair to say that your submission said that there were some far right-wing groups who were creating conspiracy theories and political theories around COVID-19 and seeking to use that as an opportunity to increase their reach in New South Wales. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, they were applying their analysis of government action in some cases. This is further examples of our freedoms being trammelled by government. They're also talking about groups they target, foreign people from foreign communities, introducing the infection into what is otherwise a pure Australian community, and they were talking about using COVID to target those groups by introducing it to mosques and synagogues.
Yeah, all deeply offensive and appalling posts, but which had taken the opportunity, if I could call it that way, of COVID to try and press their ideological wagons. Is that right?
I think that's a fair assessment, yes.
Yeah. Have you got an assessment separate to COVID-19 of whether or not neo-Nazi and sort of proto-fascist groups are on the rise or not in New South Wales?
I know that groups who might pose a terrorist threat are constantly being monitored, and we contribute to that monitoring through the JCTT, the Joint Counter-Terrorism Task Force that involves New South Wales Police, ASIO and the AFP. And that monitoring has been ongoing for a long time. To say to what extent that's been increasing, I'd have trouble giving you a detailed answer.
All right. There have been a series of attacks against the Sikh community in Western Sydney, an attack on the Sikh temple at Glenwood, 2 attacks on young Sikh men in Harris Park, and I'm aware of yet another attack. Have those attacks upon the Sikh community been brought to your attention or the Crime Commission's attention?
I'm not aware if the JCTT has looked at those or not. I can take that on notice.
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt you. Could I have 5 minutes to have a read of this document?
Oh, has it just arrived?
Yeah.
Yes, well, do you know what I might do is I might just finish the line of questioning with Commissioner Barnes and then we'll take a short break. We might have a 10-minute recess if members are okay with that.
I can't argue with that, but unless he's going to be asked a question now, can he get a head start?
There is a question that comes back to Commissioner Fuller on this, that's all. Sorry, Commissioner Fuller.
Right.
And, have you had have any concerns been raised with you about far-right extremism coming from certain political elements in the Indian diaspora in New South Wales? Mr. Barnes?
Not that I can immediately recall, but I can check that for you.
Commissioner Fuller, there have been a number of complaints made to police from the Sikh community. Most recently, in the last few weeks, an attack on a Sunday night in Harris Park on 4 young Sikh men. It appeared to be, on the face of it, motivated by reason of their identity and potentially by reason of political disputes, especially regarding the farmers' law in India. Can you shed any light on what the extent of the police investigations are and what the police response is?
So there's a 2-tiered response to this. There is the criminal investigation that's happening, and there have been other matters made to police, and they are continuing at the moment. It has been challenging getting statements of some of the victims. I'm not talking about the most recent one. We also have Assistant Commissioner Peter Thurtell, who is our multicultural spokesperson. He's working with the communities and the community leaders, trying to ensure that we keep peace in Australia, being mindful that these issues are happening a long way away.
Have you undertaken, or have New South Wales Police undertaken any investigations about what, if any, political motivation or intent may have been underlining these attacks against the Sikh community?
Our intelligence command is doing environmental scanning across open source, looking for information that may assist us. I mean, at the end of the day, the community leaders need to work with us to ensure that we don't see violence on our streets. So that is happening. Now, is the Joint Counter-Terrorism Team has an open investigation in relation to this matter? The answer is no. But obviously, if it was an escalation and we thought they need to be involved, then of course they would. But we would be sharing intelligence with them.
Is your investigation about, again, in relation to those spate of attacks, particularly against the Sikh community, does it involve consideration about whether they have political motivations, particularly coming from the far-right political movement, if I could call it that way,
I guess
from India?
that joint tension, we're looking at it collectively, political motivation, local issues, what's happening overseas, that is all captured in the overall intelligence picture.
Are you willing to sit down with the Sikh community leaders and hear their concerns firsthand?
Assistant Commissioner Peter Thurtell was tasked by me to do that, but of course, if a community group wanted to meet with me, well, then I meet with them all the time. So if you're saying to me they want to meet with me, they haven't asked personally, then I'm happy to meet with them, yes.
All right. This might be a convenient time. Why don't we come back at 25 past? Are people comfortable with a 15-minute break? How long will it take you, Mr. Commissioner Fuller?
Let's, not long.
10
All right, we'll
minutes.
say 20 past, and I think, Mr. Commissioner Barnes, I think you may go and not come back.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
20 past.
Anyone else who can?
Thank you for that time, Commissioner, and we'll have a document that I understand you'll tender shortly, which addresses those answers on very brief notice, which we will endeavour to publish on the committee's website as soon as a redacted version is made available.
Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner, what, if any, disciplinary action has been taken against police involved in the assault of a young Aboriginal man that was filmed in Surrey Hills on the 1st of June 2020? And that was the young man who was thrown to his face in the park.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That matter was investigated by Professional Standards Command, overseen by the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission. It's my understanding that that information collected has...
I think that's an education hearing.
Want me to wait or keep talking?
We tend to ignore it.
Oh, okay, sorry. Normally people run out of the room when I'm... has been sent to the Office of Department of Prosecution to assess whether or not that matter was an assault matter. My understanding that the officer is still in the workplace on restricted duties, but the second part I'm happy to take on notice.
All right. My understanding is that the matter was referred to the DPP some substantial time ago. Do you know when it was referred to the DPP?
I'd have to take it on notice.
And has there been a response from the DPP?
Not to my knowledge, but I will take that on notice as well. These matters normally take 6+ months, as in the answer.
The answer from the DPP?
Yes.
Do you have any data on how long it's taking you to get answers to this was a sufficiency of evidence brief, was it?
That's correct.
Do you have any data about how long it's taking to get those responses from the DPP?
I mean, it's another agency. It is, in fairness, out of my control. Obviously, we would like to get things back quicker, but they no doubt balance workloads like we do.
I'm certain they don't have unending resources, but do you track how long it's taking?
No, we don't.
Have you noticed whether or not that period has been getting longer or shorter?
No, and to be honest, Mr. Shoebridge, it's not something that I'm involved in every day. But professional standards could have a better understanding of that because they deal with them on a regular basis. I think it's Group 6, so I'm more than happy to take that away to see if there's been a trend.
Thanks. Mr. Baxter, did you make a series of comments on the New Zealand Professional Firefighters Union's Facebook page recently?
No, I did not.
There are a series of posts that purport to come from a Paul Baxter. Have they been raised with you?
Yeah, they were. I was made aware of them by a friend in Germany as the matter happens, and it appears that someone made either a copy or some kind of a duplicate account under my name and made comments. I was made aware of those.
Okay, I'll just show you this doc and we can just make sure we're talking about the same thing.
Suspect you are.
Yep, those are the ones I was made aware of.
Yeah. And is that an image of you, though, Mr. Baxter? Has someone gone to that trouble?
Yes.
And as far as you didn't, it's your evidence that that wasn't you that did that?
That's right.
And that it appears to be a fake Facebook
That's right.
account?
Yep.
Have you contacted Facebook to try and get it shut down?
No, but I went about the normal securities of changing passwords and things like that. Yeah, I did.
So was it someone who took over your Facebook account, a
I don't
dormant
think
Facebook
so.
account?
I think it was a duplicate account or something made of my account.
All right. And you don't have a habit of making Facebook comments during work hours?
I don't make any Facebook comments on any public sites other than my friends and family.
All right. Probably a very wise course of action, Commissioner.
I think so.
Commissioner Fuller, last year the LEC recommended that New South Wales Police ensure Professional Standards Command, and I'll quote from the LEC recommendation, monitor all newly registered misconduct matters and be involved in the triaging of misconduct matters relating to bullying and harassment with a view to identifying any patterns of behaviour amongst specific officers or complaint clusters about specific officers, specific police stations or commands. The identified offending behaviour should then be investigated. Do you remember that recommendation coming from LEC?
Oh, I mean, read all of LEC's reports. So in relation to that, Mr. Shoebridge, Professional Standards Command undertook an enormous amount of work about looking for indicators, even beyond bullying and harassment, that might be indicators that could be, it could be something to do with sick leave, or it could be something to do with other types of complaints. It could be something to do with excessive force complaints. So they undertook a huge piece of work trying to look at, what are the common themes among officers who behave badly. That was a byproduct of that recommendation.
All right, but what the LEC are asking for is going beyond that, to actually have effectively a live database of misconduct matters, particularly those involving bullying and harassment, to see if there's a pattern developing in, say, one command.
But we do have a database that allows us to look across all commands around complaint matters.
Well, are you doing that? Are you monitoring that database to see how many bullying and harassment complaints happen command by command?
Yes.
Can you provide on notice the number of bullying and harassment commands that have been received, bullying and harassment complaints that have been received on a command by command basis over the last 2 financial years?
Yes.
And that would include this partial financial year to the extent you have that evidence?
Look, the data's not like pulling information out of cops, but I'll get you whatever information I can for a month-by-month basis, or however that trend is produced, whether it's quarterly or 6 monthly. But I understand what you are asking for.
Have you had raised with you concerns about any particular commands where there may be a pattern and in fact a significant number of bullying and harassment complaints being made in relation to any one command?
Not for bullying harassment.
Or have you had concerns about a pattern of misconduct matters arising from any one particular command?
Yeah, we certainly had Surrey Hills Police Area Command had an increase in a broad range of indicators that allowed us to take a deep dive, and we identified that there was a lack of supervision, support, so officers needed more training. So we've taken that as a template now, so we're continually reviewing across all commands. And this is not about punishment necessarily, but it's about leadership and experience and profiling commands to see, because we talked about gender. Gender is important, but experience is important, supervision is important, and these are age-old things that came out of the Royal Commission.
Commissioner, have you had any concerns raised with you about the number of bullying and harassment complaints that come out of the Wagga Command?
The Wagga Command, I was the Region Commander for 2010 and 11. It is a complex command. It's a district now. And there are a number of police that have retired medically unfit and unhappy, and the command has certainly had its challenges culturally over the years. There's lots of good police there who work extremely hard, but it is one of the more difficult cultural challenging commands.
Can you identify how many police have retired from the police on medical grounds and who have had part of their concerns bullying and harassment from the Wagga Command in the last 3 years?
Yeah, I will endeavour to get that information for you.
Would it be fair to say that the Wagga Command is on your radar, given the concerns and the number of concerns that have come out of the Wagga Command?
It's a command that I certainly visit as often as I can, and leadership visits as often as we can, particularly to support the police that are in the workforce, yes.
Well, do you have a strategy to address concerns about management practices in the Wagga Command?
Yeah, look, absolutely. We ensure that we backfill positions when they become vacant. We continue to put more staff in the command. Wagga is one of the biggest inland cities in Australia. It's an area where socio-economically it has changed dramatically over the last 20 or 30 years. So we've taken about the 1,500. I put a lot of new police positions in there, DV positions, mid-level crime positions. We're constantly looking at leadership. We're constantly looking at complaint and other data.
Yeah, but unlike other big internal, big inland city commands like Dubbo or Tamworth, there have been a spate of concerns raised. There have been a spate of complaints about bullying, harassment out of the Wagga Command that's of a different order to what you find in other big inland city commands like Dubbo and Tamworth. Isn't that right, Commissioner?
I'd have to be honest with you, that what you've asked me is Wagga on my radar. Yes, it is. To do the comparative analysis, in fairness, I'll take that on notice.
All right. Commissioner, are you tracking the number of complaints that have been initiated by more senior management in the police, and by that I mean superintendent level and above, the number of complaints that are made by individual members of the senior management to determine if there are any patterns there?
About them or them making complaints? Sorry,
Them making complaints. or being the
Superintendents
sorts of
making complaints?
Correct. About officers in their command.
We obviously track complaint data. There is a phenomenon about upward bullying, and that does exist as well. And we find often when new commanders come in and they're trying to make improvements that sometimes that is resisted, and that does create challenges. So we track complaint data. Do we specifically track complaints made by an individual rank? No, we don't.
So in terms of tracking complaint data, does part of that involve if there have been a significant number of complaints by one officer, do you then send somebody in to track the nature of those complaints to see if there's a pattern in them?
We certainly have the ability for professional standards, and they have in the past escalate and take over complaint matters that are more serious or too complex to be left within a command. That can happen, yes, and does happen.
Yeah, I mean, you would have had police raise concerns with you that the complaints process is being used to silence dissent. That wouldn't be news to you, that there are those complaints made about the way in which complaints process is
will make
used?
complaints about anything, you know what I mean? But I think that the oversight of New South Wales Police, honestly, since the Royal Commission, I can't believe that in this day and age someone could try and say that they're being stifled with human rights commissions. There's all these different commissions out there to support the voice of people, including people in the upper house. This idea that we're smothering complaints, I think it's mythical, to be honest with you. And I'm not blind to corruption. I'm not blind to bad behaviour.
Are you tracking the data? And I say this in circumstances where there has been persistent reporting, some of that including the allegations that more than 100 police have reported issues about the way in which complaints are managed within a command to silence dissent or to exclude people from the command. I mean, you would have seen that reporting this year, Commissioner.
I'm sorry, I got lost in the answer to the question. Sorry, could you just...
Well...
You're asking me if I track data to the granular detail of what you're speaking about?
Well, I'm asking
no, I
you,
don't.
Have you sought some data analysis since the persistent media reporting that as many as 100 police have reported issues about the way complaints are managed within a command?
Have I spoken to Deputy Commissioner Warboys? Have I spoken to Assistant Commissioner Casa and PSC about Wagga and my expectations? Yes, I have.
And have you asked for a data analysis on complaints to track patterns?
Not as in broad patterns, yes, but not to the granular detail that you're talking about.
Do you think that would be a useful management tool?
For the Commissioner of Police or for the management of the command?
For not necessarily for you to do the data analysis, but for you to have the data analysis requested, so as you could see whether or not those patterns existed.
Well, data is only an indicator. That data is not evidence of behaviour, but I acknowledge we use data across all areas of the organisation.
But it appears you aren't doing that analysis on complaints.
I said we do plenty of complaint analysis. I've already said that we do complaint analysis.
All right.
But you've asked me some questions about specifically about ranks. Do I break it down to ranks? No, I don't.
All right. I'll hand over to the opposition.
Commissioner Baxter, can I ask you about call-out times? So, do you have data on how many calls are received by Fire and Rescue New South Wales for, say, by a local government area? Do you collect that data?
We would have. I don't have those to hand currently, but
Perhaps
we could
on
take on
notice,
notice and
you might be
provide.
able to, could you provide on notice the calls data for the Camden Council area?
Yep, sure. I do have some information on Camden that I could probably give you now, specifically. Over the last period of time, 1920, 880 incident responses.
880. And
I just have to add, that might not be the full Camden LGA, that might be the Camden Station response area.
right, I see. Okay. Can I ask about the response times? Is there a benchmark for the metropolitan area?
There isn't a benchmark as such. There is the reporting that goes into the report on government services, which looks at all of our response times grouped up as a state across fire rescue and across RFS. We do look at our response times, obviously, all the time to make sure that we're being able to achieve reasonable response levels to all of the communities.
What's a reasonable response level in the metropolitan area?
Well, if you're asking someone who's calling 000 and asking for help, 0 is the response time.
Of course.
But what we try to gauge off is averages, and obviously with averages there is very quick response times and there is long. So and then once again we break it down into the categories of incidents, so whether those are automatic fire alarms, whether they're structure fires, whether they're rescues, whether they're hazardous materials incidents. So there is a huge amount of data to report back against
How long,
that.
on average, how long should it take for a vehicle to get to an incident?
Look, well, like I say, there isn't.
What do you aim for, I suppose, is where I'm getting at.
Well, we can't get the problem today with modern fires is we can't get to, for example, a structure fire, so a house fire or a building fire, in under the time that it takes for a building to be fully involved in fire these days, because our information today is a working incident at a fire in a home, for example, could be fully engaged within 3 minutes, and we simply can't meet that. That's why we invest so heavily in fire education and prevention activities to prevent those fires from occurring in the first place. So obviously, as fast as possible is the time that we want to be in attendance at any of those incidents, because of the fact that people.
So what is the average then?
The average across
Metropolitan Sydney.
Metropolitan Sydney, if you just give me a moment, I will give you those figures when I can find the paper. Excuse me. So the average for the 1920 year is, and once again this is averages. So it's what we consider the 90th percentile. So the amount and the median value of that is 11 minutes 58 seconds.
11 minutes is the average across
And that is
Metropolitan.
within fire districts. So within urban fire districts.
Within a fire district,
Yep.
I see. And so what fire district services are in Park now?
That is serviced by 2 stations, being Camden and Narellan stations.
Right. And so how do you calculate the response time for calls for, say, that are originating in Oran Park?
The same way.
Same way.
Yep.
So are you able to provide that data? Now
In
or on notice?
1920, there were 85 incidents across all of those categories that I listed earlier, with an average response time of 11 minutes 4 seconds.
11 minutes 4 seconds.
Previous one was
Okay.
58.
Can I ask about how you prioritise? I'm assuming there's some dialogue with the government about priorities in terms of station construction. Where does Oran Park sit in terms of your priority list? It's a commitment that's been
Oran Park is the next priority for building of a new station and staffing.
That's the next priority.
Followed by, there's a number of areas, obviously west and southwest is of big interest to us, so we've had ongoing discussions with the Minister around both of those resources, Oran Park, Marsden Park, and also of interest now as well as the Aerotropolis area, which is going to massive growth over the next 5 to 10 years. And
So when you say, apologies, Commissioner Baxter, I wasn't trying to interrupt you.
But you are. Still
Is that a point of order?
Yes, it is.
Rose,
Point
just let
taken.
Mr. Baxter
Sorry.
finish. Commissioner Baxter finish.
Sorry, where are we at?
You were just saying the Aerotropolis.
So Aerotropolis, we expect to see extra fire stations required there from the massive amount of activity that will be resulting from the airport and the surrounding industrial commercial buildings that we expect to develop there over the years.
When you say you've had discussions with the Minister about Oran Park and Marsden Park, what's the nature of those discussions? Is that you saying we think these are priority areas, we need a budgetary allocation for those? Is that the nature of those discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the development of both Oran and Marsden Park, obviously capital was allocated for them for the purchase of the land to secure the position to build the stations on. But also that it is sat in one of our budget lines for quite a few years. I think it was 2013, if I recall rightly, that the original budget allocation was made to purchase the land, and the expectation was completion would be around 2023, is my recollection.
It's the allocation.
Sorry to interrupt, Anthony. Commissioner, we've now been provided with a copy of your answers to the questions that were put on notice to you, where a number of names have been redacted, and I can just indicate that's now been received, and I was just asking for a resolution that we receive it and publish it.
I so move.
All right.
Chair.
All in favour, all against? Carried. For anybody who is watching the feed, I would expect that would be published on the committee's website in the very near future. Sorry, Mr. Diam.
That's okay, thank you. So is the absence of a budget allocation the only reason why Oran Park hasn't proceeded?
Well, without budget, we can't build a fire station.
But there might have been some other obstacle as the reason why the government has held back on the money
Not that
flowing.
I'm aware of, no.
No, so it's solely a budgetary issue that's preventing it from proceeding.
Well, I mean, tempered with that has to be the requirement for a station in the first place. And so, whilst we know that the development of both of those western and southwestern areas is going ahead pretty well, it was not as fast or as rapid as was initially thought. So we take into account the ability of the nearby stations across the whole network of our resources to be able to meet those timelines. As you can see, they're not well outside the expected response times at the moment, but it is increasing year on year.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask about the interaction between yourself and the Minister's office? If a request comes to dispatch a vehicle to a street party, for example, does that go through your office?
We get a number of requests from the Minister's office because there's a number of public requests go to the Minister's office to ask for fire rescue support at those things. And to be honest, we leap at the opportunity to attend those things because the primary part of our job is community interaction and community education and prevention. So all of those community engagement opportunities provide us with an avenue to interact with the public to discharge that responsibility.
So coming back to my original question, did the request about Kellyville come through you?
I think there were a number that came through from the Minister's office that I passed on to our community education team and to the local command to see whether they could fit them in with their normal responsibilities. Obviously, operational activity and availability is the prime consideration taken into account to whether they would attend any such event or not.
So how does that request get communicated to the local station? Does it come from your office, or do you
Most
go?
most likely it would be passed from my office to the local area or zone commander to action.
So, do you think? I mean, in terms of the assessment about the operational impact, where does that occur?
From frontline managers.
Frontline managers make that assessment. But do you think then, if they get a request from your office saying that the minister has asked for this, that's going to place a level of pressure on those frontline managers that's perhaps inappropriate?
Well, it would come from the Commissioner's office, from me, and what I find with most of our frontline commanders is they're only too happy to be able to help. And as I say, the opportunities for us to present in front of members of the community is something that we're looking for all the time.
Do you think it might compromise the assessment about whether there's other operational constraints on that?
Absolutely not. The operational response always comes first. It's always the primary consideration.
If there's a fire, I don't know which district is serviced by Kellyville, but what if there's a fire on the other end of the district? Does that appliance is just taken offline, is it?
Well, that happens. It happens every day. So, for example, if the Kellyville appliance was tied up at another incident, we would either move another station nearby to that district or respond to another district in. But for those types of community activities, most likely the fire appliance and crew stays available throughout that activity, so they're available to...
So they're available to be called to respond
to any other emergency.
Incident.
That's right.
But that adds to the response time, doesn't it?
Well, it depends where the incident is. It could be faster.
It might.
Yeah.
So it's a risk, isn't it?
But
it's
that's
an additional risk.
But that's a risk that we
on.
play every day, and we have what we refer to as our dynamic risk tool, which is used by our communication centres, and that pulls on the data from our AVL, or automatic vehicle location, to know where the nearest, most appropriate resource is at all times.
Do you think?
So you could never say it would be longer or shorter, because it would be highly dependent on where the incident was.
Sure, it's an unknown, isn't it? It's an unknown.
Yep.
But there is an element of risk there that you're taking because of a request that the minister's made for a non-operational reason.
No, I think, look, it's everyday business for us, just the same as you might see a fire appliance parked at a school discharging a community education activity, or parked at a building doing a pre-incident plan. Those are normal activities, and I think one of the common misnomers today is that firefighters sit on fire stations all day waiting to go to calls, and that's simply not the case. Firefighters are a mobile resource, and they move all around the city all of the time to discharge their responsibilities.
Is this a regular thing? How many times have you dispatched a vehicle to the Kellyville street party?
I'm not sure on that specific one, but we undertake thousands.
Can you take that on notice?
Happy to. Thousands of community activities every year.
Can you perhaps provide on notice over the last 5 years the number of street parties that appliances have been dispatched to, and other community events, perhaps with some indication of the type of event that they're dispatched to?
Most of them within our system,
specific purpose.
In order to be able to retrieve them, would only come back out of our data system as community engagement events. I'm not sure that we could get to that level of detail. We will look at that. I'll take that on notice and look at see whether we can give specific, but I would imagine it would be rolled up to just a community engagement activity.
How appalling that our emergency services might engage with the public.
Commissioner Baxter, in your view, is Fire and Rescue New South Wales adequately funded in terms of the mental and emotional well-being of the workforce?
Look, I'm pleased to say that as a result of the bushfire funding package that was made available, we've been able to make significant progress with our mental health and wellbeing teams. We had already taken the decision to put additional resources into that area, and we have received, I think, in the order of another $7 million towards our full-time mental health support team, which is going to provide us with additional full-time firefighter support officers, which are our first point of call for all of our firefighters, and additional professional mental health workers and so far as full-time psychologists. So we've made more progress against that in the last 12 months than we've probably made in the last 5 years.
Has there been one measure of the impact of this work on the workforce is workers' compensation claims, particularly for psychological injury. Has there been an increase in workers' compensation claims for psychological injury?
15? No, it's not 15. Look, what I can say is, and happy to give you the exact figures on notice.
That would be useful, thank you.
We have seen an increase in the amount of requests for support based on mental health issues. However, I add to that I think that from our point of view, that is actually a good problem for us to have, because that is indicating to us through the huge amount of work that's being done through our peer support team and indeed across our People and Culture division, removing that stigma of firefighters to be able to report on and talk about those issues is becoming far more acceptable in the workplace. So what we would be looking for in the longer term performance indicators is that reducing the severity of those mental health issues over the longer term would indicate to us that the whole system for us is working.
And in terms of the people that are putting up their hand and asking for help and support now, are all of those requests able to be met?
Yes, and there's a number of different ways people can access help, because some people don't want people within the organisation knowing about it. So there is the external employee assistance program, there is our chaplaincy system, and then, as I say, there is our peer support network, and there is our welfare officers, and then there is our psychologist as well. Where someone had raised an issue and wanted to deal with that completely outside the organisation, we're also able to support that as well.
In terms of the Orchard Hills Emergency Services Academy, what is the cost of that project?
The project is ongoing, but I think we're on record, previous estimates committee, as reporting the total investment, noting that it's a private-public partnership arrangement, as being circa $80 million. However, there is ongoing investment into that facility as funds allow.
Is there an intention to have the training college at the academy privatised and set up as a registered training organisation, an RTO, a separate RTO?
There's been no discussion that I'm aware of that's taken place in that regard.
And what is the nature of the public-private partnership at Orchard Hills?
The nature of the public-private partnership is about the access to the land. So the partner, which was, what do they call now? Aware Super. Was First State Super, who own the land and the buildings. It's a long-term relationship, and that allows us, they own the land, the buildings, and we own all of the other assets, so the training props and what have you that are on site.
And that's the only sort of private engagement in the academy, other than the fact that the land and the buildings are privately owned. The rest of the academy and its work is done, by Fire and Rescue New South Wales and or the RFS.
Yeah, wholly and solely by Fire Rescue, but it's termed an emergency services academy. In fact, just 2 weekends ago, we had significant multi-agency training there, and we're always discussing with both the SES and RFS and police how the various agencies can benefit from the training props and facilities that are available there.
It was a private-public partnership for the construction and long-term leaseback, wasn't it?
Yep.
And then you effectively run the facility.
Yeah. And there's no intention, as I said, I asked about an RTO, but there's no intention to bring on any other private providers or private operators within that facility?
Certainly not at my level, not that I'm aware of. There's been no drive to do that, and noting that we are an RTO anyway under the government arrangements to issue and moderate qualifications.
That's right. Commissioner York, I wanted to ask about the billboards that went up in and around Western Sydney in relation to flooding, which were branded as SES billboards, SES advertising. Were you involved in the development and rollout of that advertising campaign?
No, that was before I commenced in this role.
Have you, since your commencement in the role, have you had any concerns raised with you in relation to that advertising campaign?
I have been informed that some of the community found them quite confronting. From my understanding is they were reflecting the risk. It's a high risk area in relation to flooding, and I understand that some of those billboards are no longer there.
Yeah, and so I suppose, is there an intention from you, at least in terms of going forward, to continue with that type of advertising?
No, it's not part of the communication and media campaign that we're currently doing. So we've been increasing our community awareness in that area over the last 12 months. We've had 2 campaigns, which was a lot of door-knocking pamphlets and some online media, and using the local media outlets as well. And that's going, we're planning now another session of that campaign, and it's been very successful. In fact, it's led, our results on the survey has led to 71% of that community taking a positive action in relation to their awareness and preparation in relation to flooding in the Hawkesbury and Nepean Valley area.
And just in terms of the campaign that was run before your time as Commissioner, are you aware of whether or not that originated from your predecessors in the SES and was something that was an SES sort of overseen campaign, or was it your understanding that that was done more so from the Minister's office or another agency?
My understanding is, and we're currently in a partnership with the Department of Primary Industry and Environment, that it was a partnership in relation to that campaign between those 2 organisations. But New South Wales State Emergency Service are the combat agency for floods, and we take the focus and priority in relation to getting the information out to the community. But I'm not aware of the details of the campaign.
So you're not aware of sort of who came up with the idea or who proposed it to who? That's not information that you have?
Oh, or who approved the billboards, no.
Okay, thanks. Just wanted to ask a little bit about flood emergency plans. From my understanding, a number of flood emergency and flood preparedness plans are out of date. How regularly are those audited?
Okay, so we wouldn't class them as out of date. There are review dates that are specified to be done, and it takes into account any change in risk, so development, changes of watercourse, extra drainage, etc. So we rely on the council to do a flood study. Once they have completed their updated flood study, we then go and update our flood plans. There are a number that have been past their review date, but we're working our way through reviewing those and working with council, and where possible, motivating the council to complete their more recent flood studies.
Had you finished this line of questioning, Rose, or almost?
Yeah, that's fine.
If you had 1 or 2 to finish it,
No,
you're welcome.
that's fine.
Okay. Commissioner Fuller. Commissioner's a difficult title in these circumstances. Commissioner Fuller, thank you for providing those further details. There are just a couple of questions that flow from that.
Yes.
The first is that I see from the answers that the matter was transferred from, and this is the answer to question 27.
Oh, thank you.
That there are a number of phone calls between South Australia Police and New South Wales Police between the 21st and the 28th of November 2019, where the investigation was initially transferred. Do you see that?
Sorry, I'm making a meal of it.
I'll start again.
No, not your question. I'm making a meal of getting to 27. Do you mind if I quickly read it again?
Yeah, so the answer to the question is, how much contact and when did the strike force have with South Australia Police? And it says, the first answer is a number of times between the 21st and 28th of November 2019, where the investigation was initially transferred. Do you see that?
Yes.
So I think we can, it's not clear from that whether it was transferred on the 21st or the 28th, but at least by the 28th of November 2019, the matter had been transferred to New South Wales Police. So I read that, is that correct?
Correct.
Then the answer to question 2 is about when did the complainant speak to New South Wales Police? and the first time was a phone call on the 26th of February 2020. Do you see that?
Yes.
Was that the woman contacting the New South Wales Police, or was it New South Wales Police contacting the woman?
And again, I would have to take it on notice. And not being difficult, but I said when I read this, I knew there would be more questions.
Yep.
So that's a fair question. I can get the answer to it.
The other question I have is, can you explain why there was a 3-month delay between the transfer of the matter from South Australian Police at the end of November 2019 and the first contact between the complainant, between the woman and New South Wales Police on the 26th of February 2020? Can you
I will be
explain the
able to,
3-month
but I will
delay?
have to take that on notice.
Because there's nothing in the chronology that's been provided in these answers that would explain, gives a reason for the delay.
No, I accept it, and I would just again reiterate that we pulled this together as quickly as we could, and there would be additional questions. We didn't leave information out to be difficult, but this is not like a normal question on notice that I've got 4 weeks to comply with, or 3 weeks.
Commissioner, I suppose on the face of it, it is quite a concerning delay, isn't it? If you've got a serious sexual assault complaint.
Mr. Shoebridge, I understand.
And just let me finish the question and then you can do the point of order, Wes.
Okay.
Commissioner, on the face of it, there's a concern there, isn't there? A serious sexual assault complaint matter, and there's a 3-month delay between it being transferred and the first contact between the police and the woman making the complaint.
And I'm going to raise a point of order at this point, and that is that the Commissioner has committed to taking the question on notice for you. To then press his opinion when he's taken that on notice is, I think, not within the spirit, particularly given that he has had the answers brought to you within hours of receiving the questions and taking the questions on notice initially.
Yep.
I think that, it's appropriate that he be given the time now.
I get the flavour of your point of order.
I mean, on
Ms. Jackson.
the point of order, the questioner is allowed to ask whatever questions he wants, so long as they're in order, which they are. The Commissioner can continue to take matters on notice if he wishes to do so.
I know, but
There's no such thing as the spirit
I think
of the thing.
I think Rose is right. It's always the point that I've taken. But nevertheless, this is a matter of particular sensitivity, and the Commissioner has actually gone out of his way to help us. So I'm concerned if the Commissioner is, in a sense, embarrassed by having gone to this effort to help us, but had the caveat of not being able to answer all the questions, if he's then kicked around the room because there's parts still missing. I think that's a bit unfair.
I think it's unfair.
No, I accept that we've had a good faith engagement from the Commissioner to give us information, so I want to be clear about that. But I have heard the point of order, and I think it is in order, and I suppose the Commissioner's heard the exchange between members. Did you want me to put the question to you again?
No.
Commissioner?
From my perspective, this has been a very complex case, not because the alleged offender is who he is. This was a complex case, and the difficulty in discussing this and not getting into a victim-bashing mode is very difficult. But the alleged victim in this matter was engaged and disengaged during this process, which is totally acceptable. So for you to conclude, Mr. Shoebridge, at the moment that police were slack in this, I think is unfair, but I will take on notice to answer the question about what happened during that time frame.
Commissioner, I didn't put that in my question, and I don't know the reason for the delay or the gap in time, and I'm asking for you to provide an answer, and I'm quite comfortable with you providing it on notice to actually explain.
But in fairness, you said
Passage of
to me that was really concerning, and that's a direct.
Well,
in fairness, so how else do I take that? It can't be concerning against the victim.
If this is a point of order, I'll take it.
I will take it. It is a point of order. I was going to say,
Yep.
you were, the witness had taken the question on notice, and then your line of questioning, and I'm happy to check Hansard to confirm what, the exact wording, but it was along the lines of, it is concerning, and do you agree that? And that was when I made my point of order. Now, asking...
But that isn't a point of order.
Well, I think it's actually a new question, and which is why I was raising the initial point of order, which was the question was taken on notice.
That's not a point of order. Commissioner, to get it in context, and perhaps you could take this on notice, is there a policy about proactive engagement in these circumstances? And because I could see it would be very difficult for a complainant if there was a 3-month delay between the matter being transferred to a police force and actually hearing anything back. Is there a policy about proactive engagement and support of complainants?
But there are plenty of cases, and this could be one, where the victims don't want to engage. Now, we need to respectfully let me answer the question before we draw a conclusion around incompetence. So that the victim,
I wasn't
and
making that allegation of incompetence, Commissioner.
well,
for the record.
you wouldn't have been saying that about the victim, Chair. The victim in this case, or the family of the victims, or the friends of the victims, no one has criticised the police response to this.
Commissioner, the second and final question I have at this stage on the answers is, in answer to question 28, the request is that the question is how many applications made by New South Wales Police to travel to South Australia in March to June 2020, how many and when? And there's reference there to one application for request to travel on the 16th of March declined on the 13th of March 2020. I'm assuming that that's a request related to this matter.
Correct.
And do you know who it was who declined the request?
It was Deputy Commissioner Dave Hudson on the basis of the rules that I put in place broadly on travel outside of the state of New South Wales, and I'm 99% sure that that was a state government edict in terms of travel, but I'll take that on notice.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner, the 1920 annual report shows the number of people on senior executive salaries in the New South Wales Police had risen to 74.
The 1920?
Yes.
The 19/20.
Correct,
Right.
yes. Financial year.
Gotcha.
Do you have details of the current number of senior executives?
I'm sorry,
And these are public service senior executives, non-uniform.
I wasn't, I'm sorry. I was having fun with Mr. Khan. I apologise, Chair. Could you ask the question again?
Be careful. Commissioner, the financial year 1920 annual report for the New South Wales Police shows the number of public service senior executives in the force was 74. Do you have any data at the moment about the number of senior executives in the New South Wales Police?
I could answer it on notice without problem.
Well, the earlier annual report for the previous from financial year ending June 2018, so 2 years earlier, the number of senior executives in the public service part of the New South Wales Police was 23. How is it that the number of senior executives has risen from 23 in June 2018 to 74 in June 2020?
It could have been just the reporting standards change, Mr. Shoebridge. I know during re-engineering in the 18-19 financial years, we removed 100 senior positions and converted those to constables, so I would have to take it on notice.
We've had a more than tripling of senior executive salaries in just 3 years.
Again, it doesn't make sense because I deleted 100 through re-engineering, so I would have to take it on notice. We deleted 100 positions, delivering a potential savings of $54 million, but Cabinet made a decision that they'd be returned to constables, so I made a $14.4 million savings. So
well, these are public service executives. These aren't uniform.
I accept everything you're saying, and I will take it on notice in terms of getting you an answer.
Commissioner, are you aware of whether or not there's a policy inside the New South Wales Police that where civil complaints or civil claims are made against the police, whether or not it's standard policy for the police to require non-disclosure agreements as part of a settlement agreement?
The civil claims is all but out of my hands and is dealt with through the insurer. There are matters that are settled that I probably wouldn't settle that I'd like to run. So whilst the behaviour of the settlement is my responsibility, often the terms are determined outside of my hand.
Well, Commissioner, would you be aware of the fact that in the overwhelming majority of cases, when police are offering settlements, they come with the requirement that the settlement include a confidentiality agreement, basically a gag
that's
agreement?
a standard commercial agreement. And I think people rarely even apply it by the way the leaks to the paper occur. So I'm not sure that it's worth the paper it's written on. But again, I would imagine that's a fairly standard clause in settlements.
Well, do you think it's appropriate to require confidentiality as part of a settlement when there is public money being paid to resolve a claim? Do you think that's a good public policy position?
Well, it's a public policy position. It's not a New South Wales police position, then, is it?
Well, if you speak to lawyers who act in matters against police, it's almost a uniform part of a settlement offer from the New South Wales Police, including from offers that come from
police
General
continually
Counsel.
second-class citizens? If every other agency can settle with confidence, but we can't, so commercially we're treated like second-class citizens?
Well,
We're less
Commissioner,
important
that's
than
your
doctors
observation.
or lawyers or teachers or politicians.
Well, when it's
we're only
public-
applying the same rule as everyone else does. As you said, it's a general standard.
Well, no, I think I put it to you as a general proposition.
No, you said it's a general standard.
Well, the transcript will speak for itself, Commissioner. I won't debate you on it. Do you believe it's appropriate?
I think it's
New South-
appropriate.
let
we
me finish the
maintain
question.
Oh, sorry, apologies.
Do you think it's appropriate for New South Wales Police to require confidentiality on civil settlement claims when it's public money that's being paid over?
I'm happy that we're applying general standards.
Do you think it's appropriate that confidentiality agreements be sought in matters involving persons who have concerns about the way in which police dealt with sexual assault claims, for example?
I'm satisfied that New South Wales plays the same process as the rest of government does.
So is it true that the New South Wales Police are willing to effectively pay to silence a victim? It's part of a confidentiality agreement. They're willing to pay to actually get the confidentiality and the gag.
Well, the
Is that
alleged
part of
victims
police?
have the right to go to the media. They have the right to go to politicians. It's a matter for themselves.
Well, not if they have a confidentiality agreement, they don't.
But that's
That's what the confidentiality agreement covers.
Well,
I'd actually, I mean, you are the chair, and this is the difficulty we have. But I would have raised an objection to that last question
on what basis?
on the basis that it was out of order.
That's a very intellectual
Compelling argument.
point of order.
Where's,
Having heard your compelling argument, I don't believe it's a point of order.
Well, yes, the advantage of rules,
Commissioner,
Chair.
Commissioner, is it true that the police are effectively willing to pay to silence critics through confidentiality agreements?
I'd rather not pay any money and people go to the media. The lawyers won't be happy with that. Those same lawyers who are complaining make their money out of it.
And is
The
that
ambulance chasers.
So do you have a policy position of not wanting to settle claims,
No, I'd
to run
rather
claims?
people go to the media and air their grievances, or go to oversight, air your
I
grievances.
think you're now putting words in the witness's mouth, Mr. Shoebridge, and I would ask that you don't do that.
Sorry, Commissioner.
So
Had
there are
you finished?
multiple. Sorry, sir.
but can I
No,
clarify,
I'm going to let you
could do
finish.
that,
No,
Commissioner.
before either Mr. Diadam or Mr. Fang interfere again with your answers, I'm going to allow you to finish your answer.
It is hard to keep up.
It is. Tell me about it.
From my perspective, you create avenues for people, such as oversight, they can go to that. They can go to the Industrial Relations Commission, Human Rights Commission, they can go to members of the upper house, they can go straight to the media. There are all these avenues for them. Some people take an avenue to litigate against us, and we, as the insurers for government, apply the same rules for New South Wales Police as every other agency. It's not as though New South Wales Police has their own rules around settling civil claims.
Is it your understanding that New South Wales Police are bound by and comply with the model litigant policy?
Oh, I'd have to take that on notice. I'm not a lawyer like you, Mr. Shoebridge. I'm just a simple commissioner, but I would have to take that on notice.
Would be interesting to get that on the record.
Noted.
Done. I think at this stage I will hand over to the opposition.
Oh, over to us, okay. So I'm going to ask Commissioner Baxter. Apparently, Wodonga in Victoria is upgrading to 2 fully staffed stations in a city with a population of 45,000. I think earlier we heard how Wagga is the largest inland city. It's got 65,000 people. But it only has 1 fully staffed 24-hour appliance.
Did you say Wodonga? That's in
Wagga
Victoria.
Wagga, sorry. Yeah, the first example was Wagga Wagga. The second example was the first example was Wodonga in Victoria, and the second example was Wagga.
Yeah, you know
Wagga.
that's co-located with another town, right?
Point of order. I just
I'm just
don't
checking.
even know what is going on over there.
I love being.
So look,
Can other members please be
So I'm
quiet?
going to say this, it's 4:19 on the last day of 2 weeks of budget estimates. It has the potential to become untidy.
We've got half an hour to go, haven't we?
We've got half an hour to go, so can we all just stay in our lanes and the opposition has the questions?
So there's one fully staffed 24-hour appliance at Turvey Park Station, and apparently it's 20 years old. The other appliances in the city, a pumper and a tanker at Turvey Park, are often taken offline when staffing falls below safe levels. As is the pumper at Wagga Wagga Station, which is also an on-call hazmat support vehicle, and the region has no full-time professional hazmat technicians. Do you think this is an acceptable state of affairs for the people of Wagga Wagga?
Look, I can't comment on the Wodonga staffing
That's just for
situation.
comparison, you know, that it's got two for a 45,000 person city.
Yeah, well, as I say, the Wodonga situation would be subject to whatever other resources they have around them, and as is the case for New South Wales, our resources are made up of a network of stations, and we only take appliances offline for matters of training, and we recall staff to staff appliances where we feel that the risk has become too high.
Okay. David?
David, did you want to?
Yeah.
I think we're going to try and get you out of here, Commissioner Fitzsimmons.
It's
So-
not much of an alley, Mark, but
Yeah.
the
Doesn't mind staying.
Commissioner, I might just show you this document.
Which one, me?
Yes.
Me.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Commissioner.
No, that's right. No, that's right. You were just talking about me 2 seconds ago. Yeah.
Fitzsimons.
I still think you should stay.
This will have to be a zinger. He's been waiting.
Pretend it is. The Commissioner, I won't ask you to read it in detail, but I might ask you to take it on notice, and I'll set out the circumstances. This gentleman made a claim to the Office of Emergency Management, asserting that his house had burnt down in the fires, and the conclusion was that because he hadn't been living in it at the time that the house had burnt down, that he wasn't able to receive any relief, even though it was his only residence that he owned. Could I ask you if you could review the case? And then can I ask you now, is that the case, that even if it's your only home that burnt down, you may be living in rental accommodation, if you weren't living in the house that burnt down during the bushfires, in the lead up to the fires, that you're not entitled to that emergency relief?
I'm familiar with the fellow. Did you just name the fellow? I won't name him.
I didn't.
So I'm familiar with the fellow.
And I'm consciously not doing that.
Yeah, so will I. That's raised. This is a matter that has been reviewed extensively. I'm happy to comment further on notice. But as a general rule, principal support is around primary place of residence, not about alternate dwellings or homes that people might own, whether they're holiday homes or other alternate homes. So it is about the primary support, about principal place of relevant residence, particularly around a number of the relief support packages.
So
I'll be more specific on notice.
yeah, so is it the case that if you're living in rental accommodation, if you were living in rental accommodation at the time of the fires, and the only home that you owned burnt down, that you wouldn't be eligible for support? Because your principal place of residence is the rental accommodation.
I don't mean to be pedantic, but one's home is usually where they live, not necessarily what they own. So they may own a property, they may own a house, they may own something. So it is about the principal home or the principal place of residence where the focus of relief and assistance is.
Can you indicate on notice, and I don't expect you to have the numbers in your head, how many times this situation arose where someone was living in rental accommodation and the only home that they owned burnt down and they've been denied relief on that basis?
I don't know that I'd be able to give you a comprehensive picture because we're talking about people that make application, and we consider applications, and people will often self-assess, looking at criteria about whether they will proceed with an application for support on properties or buildings that they own.
I'm only talking about applications that were made and then rejected on that
we
basis.
may have reviewed. I'll
Yes.
take that on notice, absolutely.
Yeah, and that was probably not worthwhile waiting for, Commissioner, but that was the only question I had of you.
Okay, thank you.
The opposition.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to ask where I think this is probably for Commissioner Rogers.
Sorry
can we
if
just
I may.
work
Does that mean I get to go?
Oh, yes, apologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you,
Sorry.
committee. I appreciate
Sorry,
it.
Commissioner.
You're welcome to stay.
Commissioner Rogers, I wanted to ask you where the review of the personal protective equipment was up to.
Which particular, are you talking about respiratory protection?
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading from a statement made by the Minister who, in reference to the previous RFS Commissioner, but indicated that the RFS would be conducting, quote, a review of personal protective equipment at the end of the bushfire season, but it was specifically related to respiratory protection.
Yeah, correct. We have commenced that review. We've engaged occupational hygienist to carry out, I guess, several things. Literature review on what other agencies are doing throughout the country, and also identify what the knowledge is. And what that's given us is quite a number of areas where there's actually a knowledge gap. So what has been happening across the country, there's been assumptions made about, well, we'll do X, Y, or Z, but it's been in the absence of hard data. We're doing some work with Wollongong University, and we've actually just gone out and called for expressions of interest for some of our firefighters to look at things like metabolic heat, because one of the issues we face in this area is we can put better quality masks on, no issue at all, and we could do that tomorrow. But the problem is some of the masks bring with them, when people are working in the bush for 12 hours in a day, that brings other issues like metabolic heat rise and obviously bringing heat stress. So the concern we have is that if we suddenly just react and throw another mask on, it might create another problem whilst you're trying to fix one. So we've got consultative committees with our volunteer firefighters. We're talking with other agencies. We're doing this research. We will share that with Fire and Rescue as well, that research, to make sure that we all have the benefit of, I guess, the best research to ensure that our firefighters get the best possible protection. So the commitment I've made to our organisation is that there is a number of research topics that can take some time to do, but what we will do is have an interim solution for the next fire season that will basically say, in these circumstances, here's a better quality mask, but still the P2 masks that we provide them still do meet the Australian standard, but we recognise that people didn't feel in some cases they were providing the right support for them, particularly when things other than natural bush are burning, like cars, tyres, homes. Those masks are not necessarily the best protection. So it's a complex body of work. We've certainly got a lot of work in train now, and we'll have an interim solution, but I think it's going to be some time to get a final solution.
So so the final solution will take some years even, you think, to conclude the research to fill the gaps?
It will take some time. I'm not sure if it'll be years, but it'll take some study. So, things like putting monitors on people to get the actual things that they're experiencing, carbon monoxide monitors. So there's a whole suite of things that the hygienist and the group working on it are recommending. But certainly this research deficit will be relying on external partners, and luckily we've got University of Wollongong that are going to do some significant work, but there'll still be a number of things. So very much, if we can link it into what universities are already doing, hopefully we'll get that truncated. If it becomes new bodies of research, then that time potentially is years.
So for the bushfire season that is going to commence at some point in the second half of this year, we can expect that RFS volunteers will have access to other better masks than P2 masks. That is an expectation that is not unreasonable.
Yes.
Excellent. And just wanted to clarify, obviously we had the massive injection of funding into the RFS via the Celeste Barber donation and, you know, all of the kind of subsequent litigation around that, and it was a commitment that was given that donation would be strictly in addition to government funding of the RFS, and that there would not be any commensurate reduction in government funding because Celeste Barber had raised $50 million for you guys. Is that what has occurred? Has there been any reduction in government funding from the RFS because of that donation?
No, absolutely not. In fact, the RFS has got a significant budget increase post the fires, and the Minister and the Premier made it very clear that that money was to be used on top of what we would normally allocate instead of replacing it, and that's exactly been the case. So our commitment financially to all the normal allocations we do for protective equipment, uniforms, all of those things still stands, and that money, and for example, one of the things that money's been spent on is a new generation of helmets that we're in the process of rolling out at the moment. We would have ultimately replaced those helmets, but this has allowed us to accelerate them and get those helmets out to people quicker, which are a better helmet for our firefighters. We very much focus on things that are going to make life better for firefighters, and and in my view, it's a once in a generational opportunity to change a whole lot of things to make our service better, but also the volunteers who are in it a better experience for them.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Baxter, are Fire and Rescue New South Wales firefighters being used as a stopgap for paramedics when they're unable to attend calls?
No, they're not being used as a stopgap, but they are used in addition to paramedics. So there's a number of different programs that we have underway where we assist New South Wales Ambulance. The first one is our Community First Response program, which is in locations where there are no ambulance resources immediately available, and those firefighters are trained to a high level of capability to be able to attend in the first instance any medical or trauma events, but in all cases either a road ambulance or an aerial response would come from New South Wales Ambulance. Fire Rescue New South Wales has got a long history of supporting other ambulance requests for assistance in all of our locations, and that can be from assisting to lift patients out of awkward locations. It can be to move people out of high-rise buildings where they can't be transported down stairwells or lifts, or myriad of other circumstances that occur. And we will often, even as recently as last week, attend to medical events that occur when our resources are out and about in the community. As I said last week, a cardiac arrest occurred for a crew that was on a training evolution where they used their skills, their training and our equipment as far as advisory defibrillators and resuscitation equipment to save a life.
Are you aware, though, of concerns around there being a lack of clarity or clear protocols in relation to how paramedics and fire and rescue perhaps jointly respond to events, and, for example, fire and rescue turning up before ambulance have arrived, before paramedics have arrived, and having to deal with sort of complex medical emergencies for which they're not properly trained? Are you aware of those concerns?
Well, I mean, our people will deal with those every day as a matter of their normal responses, for example, to a motor vehicle crash where they might be attending first with serious injuries, and will always do their best to support the injured person or medical person, as the example I just described earlier, because it saves lives.
Oh, of course.
I'm not sure that there's a lack of clarity. Our people are trained by New South Wales Ambulance paramedics to deliver the type of care which is clearly stipulated within our operating protocols and shouldn't go beyond that. As I discussed with the community first responder, those protocols go an awful lot further, and those protocols are well understood by the firefighters that do that, because they are, in some cases, administering medications.
Thank you. Commissioner York, how many incidents were logged with the SES during flood events in 2020?
I've got, the figures I've got, and I can get some further figures, is between the 1st of July 2020 and the 31st of December 2020, so that's a 6-month period. There were 42 operational events and we received over 49,800 calls, operational 143 days. We responded to 21,539 requests for assistance, including 197 flood rescues, 353 general land rescues, 332 road crash rescues, 27 vertical rescues and 241 community first responder activations.
Do you have any information on how many calls went unanswered?
No, I don't have that information.
Be useful to take that on notice,
Yeah,
perhaps.
I can take that on notice.
How many flood rescues did SES conduct?
197 during that period.
Obviously, you know, when there are flood events or other emergency events, there can be a substantial number of people calling the SES. Are there enough staff to answer all those calls? Are you adequately resourced to deal with some of those kind of volumes of requests that are coming in at those times?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways the calls come in. So there's 000, which goes to our emergency service agencies who have permanent staff, as well as the calls that come into 132 500. We have a surge capacity. We've got a contract with a private recruitment or a private body that provides resources for us. And during this COVID period, it was really successful to see that they couldn't all come in. We could increase our capacity because we put into account remote call taking as well. So not only did some come into the building, but they were able to do it from remote locations and take calls and activate our resources out to those calls.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions, Commissioner Fuller. How many legal firms are there on the legal panel utilised by New South Wales Police?
For which activity, sorry?
Well, I mean, so for example, in cases regarding subpoenas, for example, involving the police force, we can start there.
It's a complex question because you have Crown Sols do a lot of piece
I'm more so, do you have an internal panel?
We do in terms of employment law. You use a panel to get advice at times in terms of what likely action I should take for an officer's. So we would have I guess, for employment law we would. For other matters, it could be. Happy to take on notice.
Yeah, that would be useful.
But then there's lots of subpoena type matters that we do use Crown Sols and other internal lawyers. And AGC itself does a lot of internal work.
What is the dollar amount that you have spent with the firm Mackinson DePeace in the last 3 financial years? I presume you'll have to take that on notice.
I've never heard of them, so I'm sorry to them, but I will take that on notice.
I think the question is not about you personally, was it?
No, not you personally.
No, I accept
sorry,
what
New
you were
South Wales
saying.
Police.
No, it wasn't like a... No, I understand. Thank you.
Yeah. And how many matters have been assigned to Mackinson DePeace in the last 3 financial years?
Double G, I think.
Sorry? Noted.
I imagine you'll have to take that on notice as well?
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you. That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Baxter, how many new fire and rescue New South Wales firefighters do we currently have?
I think the number is in the order of, sorry. Sorry, did you say what firefighters?
Firefighters. How many
Okay, so,
firefighters do you
well,
have?
we've got several different workforces. We have our permanent firefighters, we have our
Yeah, if you
on-call
want to give me figures
firefighters.
for permanent, retained and operational
So
support
our current number, our establishment number of full-time firefighters is 3,463.
That's permanent full-time firefighters.
Yep.
Retained firefighters?
Retained firefighters is 3,798.
And so is that, how many does that of those two figures, how many of those are actually people? Like how many?
Well, that's the establishment.
Establishment numbers. How many actual those positions are
So
filled?
the head count for permanent firefighters, which is actual people, 3,445.
It's slightly separate, isn't it? The head count and the
Right,
actual
yeah.
number of
Yeah.
positions filled is slightly different, isn't it?
Well, that's right. We currently have more real people, if you like, than establishment positions. But that is quite often the case to manage the ebb and flow of recruitment, retirements, resignations.
Can I ask you about safe and effective minimum crewing for fire and rescue?
You almost finished this line of
I
inquiry.
am. Just one more question after this. It's currently a minimum of 4 on a fire truck, is it not?
No, we have some instances where a fire truck will have 2.
Right. Can you explain that situation?
Because they're different type of appliances and they have different staff requirements.
So, can those appliances do the same things as
No, we're talking about different specialist appliances
different
like
specialist
aerial
appliances.
appliances, like hazardous materials appliances, like technical rescue vehicles, bushfire tankers, the list goes on.
So does that mean that those appliances aren't available to fight structural fires, for example?
No, all of our appliances are available to fight structure fires, and we have safe minimum numbers that we operate with in terms of interior fire attack, which is always a minimum of 4 people on scene. How they get there will depend on what appliances are available at the time, what appliances are responded to that particular incident.
Right, okay, thank you. David?
Tragedy of it all.
Absolutely. Over to you.
Thanks, Anthony. Commissioner Fuller, is there a current panel of lawyers, private law firms who do police civil claims work?
I'll take it on notice, but my understanding is the way it works is that there is a insurance company and there's a part of government that looks after the settlement side of it, but I'll take it on notice if that is okay.
Right. Well, if there is a panel, can you identify if it was established under a tender or some kind of public process?
Is that the same question that I was asked from Labor, or is it a different question?
I think we may be cutting across each other, but the and then
I don't know his question.
no, sorry.
No, but
I may not have listened.
I could kill 2 birds with one stone.
If the same questions can be answered in one, then
Okay.
by all means.
Panels of lawyers, I'll find out how many we have.
Yep. Who's on it and the extent to which they've each been, the sums paid to those
Okay.
panels.
But if the panel of lawyers are government lawyers, that doesn't count, right?
I'm asking if there's a discrete police panel
Yep. External lawyers?
of external lawyers.
Yes.
And I'm asking, if so, what is that panel?
Yep.
And the quantum of fees paid to that panel.
Okay, but if
you can go back over the last 2 years.
but
I'm
if
not
say-
asking about Insurance New South Wales.
No, I understand. But if, say, okay, I'll do that. I'm just thinking that there could be a panel of lawyers that are used by Crown solicitors from time to time that we use, but we don't.
I'm
employ
asking
them.
if there's a discrete police panel.
Yep,
I'm
done.
not asking. I'm not asking if
David,
there's.
this is in the context of personal injuries.
This is in the context of civil claims.
Yes.
Not necessarily personal injuries, but civil
Sure,
claims.
Yeah.
And I'm not asking about those lawyers that are appointed through the Treasury Managed Fund.
Gotcha.
And Insurance for New South Wales.
Yep.
I'm
I
asking
can't
about
answer
a
that, but I
police
can
panel.
take it on notice. And I think it's the same answer to an earlier question.
Commissioner Fuller, did you have any communications with either your minister or any other government member when the proposal to provide to bring forward drug law reforms arising out of the ICE inquiry was floated at the end of last year?
Could you do that one more time?
At the end of last year,
Yes.
the government said that it was responding in part to the ICE inquiry recommendations by considering drug law reform measures. Do you recall that?
I remember that the ICE inquiry delivered a report, and I believe that we were given an opportunity to respond to that, which we did.
All right. Can you provide that response to the committee?
I think it's already on public record.
Well, if so, can you point to where it is available?
Yeah, and if not, we'll provide it. I mean, it's
So at
all in the
the-
media anyway.
Yeah, indeed. At the end of last year, in late November, early December, a matter went to Cabinet considering a depenalisation approach, particularly to drug possession.
Yes.
There was a substantial amount of public commentary about it at the time. Do you recall that?
The first I had heard of that was in the media.
All right. Did you have any communication with your minister about the issue of depenalisation at that time?
Not until it was in the media.
All right. After it was in the media, what, if any, communications did you have with your minister about it?
Just about the position that I took in response to the ICE inquiry around the issuing of infringements for certain offences was my preferred option with proper diversion programs.
Yeah, and I think from memory that was recommendation 12 of the ICE inquiry.
I'd take it on 12 or 13, yes.
But your position.
This was 12 or 18 months ago. What was my position?
All right, but the discussion you had with the minister was at the end of last year, where you reiterated the police position that in relation to certain possession charges, you would prefer a...
That was after the media, I won't say leak, but the media interest in the decriminalisation.
Yes, and you reiterated the police's position.
Well, I reiterated my response to the ICE inquiry hasn't changed.
All right, and that remains your position now?
Absolutely.
Commissioner, there's been ongoing saga involving the theft of Jeff Loy's car outside his house. I think it was on the 19th of April or so, 2020. You'd be aware of that. I'll call it a saga. You don't have to adopt that characterisation.
I don't think it is a saga, but I'm all ears.
Yep. Do you now? Does the New South Wales Police now accept the fact that his vehicle wasn't parked on private property? Is that now the position of the New South Wales Police?
The New South Wales Police Commissioner's position was that it was on public property, and I counselled Mr. Loy, and that's in public record.
All right. The initial statements from New South Wales Police asserted that it was parked on Deputy Commissioner Loy's driveway and not on public property, and that's why charges weren't preferred. When I say charges, I think it was an infringement wasn't proceeded with. Is that still the case?
From my perspective, and he was counselled, and he's a 40-year decorated veteran, and he was counselled by me over it, and that was leaving his car unlocked in a public place. Now I took that approach to it, I think, a week after the incident, right? So I believe that there was a media release that was inaccurate, and we righted that in the press when we were identified. But the New South Wales Police Commissioner took action against him for what was, I think, a minor matter versus 40 years of outstanding service to the people of New South Wales.
So was that the decision that was made, even though on the face of it was an infringement of the traffic laws to leave your vehicle unlocked in a road or a road-related area? Was the decision not to prefer the infringement notice based upon his career? Was that the rationale?
No. The officers made a decision. Now that comes with the oath of office, that officers can make decisions to use discretion. They weren't put under any pressure by me to give a ticket or not to give a ticket. Irrelevant to that, I felt it was important from a community perspective that I counsel him over it, and that was done. And I'm on the record saying that very early in the piece. Now, that may have conflicted with a media release, but the reality is that it also conflicted with my actions.
All right. Were all the items that were in Mr. Loy's car, all the police items at least, were they all recovered?
My understanding is that nothing was stolen, and his car was full of personal items at the same time that I think he'd removed from his office. So my memory is, and I will take on notice, that nothing personal or that owned by the government was stolen.
Commissioner Baxter, have you been engaged with Project Remediate?
No.
Are you aware of Project Remediate, which is the New South Wales Government's somewhat slow to be rolled out response to flammable cladding?
I'll take it. No, I won't take it later.
Sorry, I mean, we are represented on the New South Wales Government Cladding Task Force, and we are also represented on the newly formed New Products Group, which I can't recall what it is called, but that has a name as well. So we've been engaged all the way along. Sorry. Yeah.
So those, at least if you follow Minister Anderson's line of logic, all come from Project Remediate, but you weren't aware that they come under Project Remediate?
Sorry, yeah. The other group that we are involved with, which is probably, and I correct that, a subgroup of Remediate, is the Cladding Product Safety Panel.
All right. Are you aware of how many current high-risk buildings there are in New South Wales that have flammable cladding and are high risk because they contain flammable cladding?
Yeah, the current amount, when I checked earlier this week from the Task Force website, was 375.
375.
That was 4th of February, sorry.
Yep. And how many of those are high-rise residential?
Whether they're high-rise or not, I can't tell you, but whether they are a Class 2 building,
yes,
which is an
high-rise
accommodation
residential
building, 217.
217. Are you aware that the government's policy agenda under Project Remediate, which includes those two subcommittees you spoke about, are only addressing the 217 Class 2 buildings? Are you aware of that, Mr. Commissioner?
Well, they're being addressed as a priority. The rest of the buildings where we have felt that there is a fire risk or any other kind of safety item, we're providing consistent and ongoing advice to the building consent authorities or the councils. And in that regard, we have visited and undertaken more than 4,000 site visits with 7,300 inspections. So it's not, but we are prioritising the work on the Class 2 because they are the ones that present with the most risk.
Well, is there a plan to get that? On my numbers, I think it's about 158 other buildings which are identified as high risk because they have cladding but aren't Class 2 buildings. Is there a plan on how to remediate those?
There'll be individual plans with each of the building consent authority, and as I said, we provide ongoing advice to the building consent authority where we have concerns with each one of those buildings. There's been many reports.
How many of them have been remediated? Well, I assume that if they're still on the list, none of them have been remediated, is that right?
My understanding is that some have, but I could, on notice, provide you with further information on that.
Could you provide on notice a breakdown of the buildings that are on high risk? And I won't ask for their address, but could you provide a breakdown by postcode?
I'll take that on notice.
All right. And could you provide a breakdown of the buildings that are on the list, identifying, again by postcode, the numbers that are Class 2 and the numbers that are other buildings? And here I'd be asking particularly about aged care centres, public buildings, hospitals and the like.
Yeah, I'd have to take that on notice as well.
Right. Well, that concludes my questions.
Oh, okay.
There's another 7 minutes and 30 seconds if the
Commissioner,
opposition
can I
wants
ask
Don't
you-
feel the need to fill it, for heaven's sake.
And then we have 15
Yeah.
minutes from the government.
This is to Commissioner Fuller. You'd be aware of a recent shooting that actually went through a window at Auburn Hospital. You're aware of that?
Absolutely.
I'm sure.
There was a
And while local residents understand the need for special commands to combat gang violence, it seems to come at the expense of local commands. The Auburn pack has lost one SAT position and the Burwood pack has lost two SAT positions. Are you willing to review this decision given the events in the Auburn Police Area Command?
I could take on notice those losses. So what I would say, following that shooting, we fast-tracked our response to state and transnational organised crime through putting 10 additional staff and creating a new command for Raptor, including a superintendent. Another 30 positions will go into a mix of Raptor and organised crime on the 1st of July. So that is just part of our 2020 response to organised crime, and we're currently working with the Australian Government on some other strategies. But in terms of the loss of those SAP positions, if I could just take that on notice and confirm that it's correct.
Sure, that's fine. There were 15,628 prohibited and regulated weapon offences in the year up to September 2020. How many of those weapons were identified as weapons that had illegally entered Australia?
Could I take that on notice?
Sure.
I'll ask about highway patrol. I think that previously...
I can't get you out of a ticket, ma'am. I'm sorry.
No, don't worry about that. I'm not like the Minister for Police.
Oh, that's fast. It's too soon.
I'm tired. The Deloitte...
Or are you armed with a submachine gun? So anyhow,
I understand, Commissioner, last year when we asked about highway patrol, you mentioned a Deloitte review into highway patrol.
Yes.
Has that review been completed?
Look, it had, and there was discussion around reversing the centralisation of the highway patrol, which I didn't accept. We did make some other significant structural changes, including upgrading a number of senior sergeants to inspector positions to create better supervision in the field for officers and to support officers. So there was a big piece of change management that occurred. And that was really well driven by Assistant Commissioner Webb and Deputy Commissioner Loy, and we've seen a number of new senior positions created, and women have gone into those, many of those positions, continuing to drive cultural change.
So will the report be made publicly available?
Look, I'm happy to take that on notice. There was nothing particularly dramatic in the report. It was just looking at potential options. And when the highway patrol was set up, it was set up with all the right intentions, but perhaps not the right investment. And so we've been tweaking with it since, I think, 2012, and we made a decision to make some fairly big changes, and they have been implemented, I think, to the benefit of road safety.
I mean, I think, though, you mentioned some discussion in the report about reversing the centralisation. Was that a recommendation of the report?
I got to a point where we're looking at keeping it centralised. Part of the re-engineering was recognising regional New South Wales needs a slightly different model of service delivery. We moved to districts and back to the old officer in charge model, not quite the same as what it was, but it's really about having an officer who the local communities know is in charge. That sort of decentralised model, the highway patrol could have been a better fit by decentralising. But having two different types of command and control set, being the deputies and I, weren't comfortable with that. So we made a decision rather than to decentralise regional New South Wales and keep the city centralised under the Huntingwood model, is that we would just make a greater investment in terms of supervision, rank and some other changes.
Okay. Well, anyway, you take on notice whether it might be publicly available. I wanted to ask about user pays contributions. So when a user pay arrangement is made between, a local area commander and an event, where does that money go? Does that go into that local area command, or?
So the money goes a couple of different ways. It goes into the pocket of officers who are working on their days off, and that's great for them. Part of it does go back into the command, into an actual line item. So Treasury obviously monitor that, and in theory, they can offset funding to us depending on what our income is around user pay. Obviously, during 2020, that really did fall off a cliff because of obvious reasons.
Yeah, I mean, although that perhaps leads into my next question, which is how much discretion is at the local area commander level? Because in Operation Tabraka, there was some discussion about, the local area commander increasing user pays contributions, quite substantially. And there was a suggestion that for some local festival in that area, the user pays contribution was increased from $2,000 in 2014 to $70,000 in 2019. Now, it may be that that increase was necessary, but I suppose there are questions about how those things are determined.
I mean, it's determined through a debate by the organisers and the police commander.
Yeah.
I can tell you this, is that when the organisers are unhappy, they write to me immediately and they ask for a dispensation. And for things like the Easter show and other big events that we do that, we often give a 50% discount. There's often country shows where we endeavour not to, particularly if they're in difficulty, to charge them. But again, there are processes in place for people to appeal those sorts of decisions. And I have been a commander for many, many years, and all this is done through negotiation. But I would say if you have someone out there that feels as though that they are being over-policed in user pay, please send it to me or get them to write to me.
Yeah, so the process is it's determined at the local level, but there's a sort of appeal process to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And to the extent that, for example, say with the Easter show or major events, you know, maybe there is some discounting or...
And look, for the Easter show this year, we're doing our best to minimise it because they're struggling, like everyone's struggling, and we get that. So we're doing everything we can. Now, I can't do that forever, but we're doing our best to minimise user pay at the moment, understanding that people are under pressure. We don't want the Easter show to stop happening or the local country shows. So
you can take it up with my 9-year-old. She's much more fearsome than me. But does the New South Wales government sort of reimburse the police for that? So say, for example, as you said, you are trying to be understanding about major events. You're wearing those costs in a way. Is that then just absorbed within the budget, or?
So it's fairly consistent in a sense that the events, the user pay events, whether it's sporting events or the big shows and the festivals, they're fairly consistent, to be honest with you. Like that flow of money is, taking COVID out, is reasonably consistent. When it's not consistent, it is more around the heavy transport and the big wind farm type activities. You might get 1 year where but we can forecast that, and we do.
I'm certain you have more questions, Ms. Jackson. But unfortunately,
We didn't even get to strip searching.
Unfortunately, the time for questions has concluded, and those questions will have to go on notice from both of us. Commissioners and others, thank you for your assistance today. I think a number of questions have been taken on notice. You have 21 days to provide those answers to questions on notice, and that concludes today's hearing.
Is it just like... Thank you.
We have just a short deliberation.
Yeah, sure.